sometimes on mute.
Hello, everyone. I hope that we're all doing good. Hope that everyone's doing great. It is so nice to see all of you here. Welcome in, one and all, to the Shakespeare Show. So, I learned something quite interesting today, which I was not expecting to learn, which was that apparently you can rent out the pyramids. So, that's good. That's good to hear. That you can rent out the pyramids, particularly if you're Mr. Beast. So, I thought I would try to find a bit more information about that, if only because from what I can tell, and from what, other people who have looked into it. Hello, the Ferret King. How are you doing? My best pal. Welcome in. Is of course the fact that they're the pyramids. You know what I mean? Like they're supposed to be protected historical spaces, right? Particularly because they are archaeologically important, right? But yeah, somehow Mr. Beast. Thank you so much for shouting out the Ferret King. Yes. Somehow Mr. Beast was, for some reason, I don't know why. It's probably because of, because he worked really hard for it. He essentially gets to have exclusive access to the pyramids at Giza. And, again, from what I understand, is going to look for, stuff that hasn't been found before, which I should say, thinking about archaeology and all of these things, and also historians and everything, it's like the idea of random people just skulking around, again, these the pyramids at Giza. I don't know. There's just something about it that is so infuriating. And Ali, who is Egyptian, who is in Discord, and might be watching right now, literally, it is so. Hello, Simon Pierre Dubé. Ça va? It infuriates me as well, because the idea of, letting people with lots of money, right, go exploring and trying to find secret stuff that nobody's ever found before is a very bad idea, right? They're not going to find anything that they don't already. I mean, you know what I mean? They've done so much work on those pyramids, let alone everything else, right? But of course, Mr. Beast has to film his video, so we have to be willing to sacrifice, one of the most emblematic, among the most emblematic structures ever. Bien. Hello. So, we're going to talk about this. I don't know this exactly, what this channel is. I'm honestly curious about what people from the different sources that people have gotten it from, because it was Dextero, I believe, that first posted about it, and yeah, people went and looked for more of it on their own, and yes, it's they rented out all three of the pyramids, as far as I know, and they get exclusive access. So stuff that not even Hollywood, like people would get. So let's see what's going on.
Jimmy Mr. Beast Donaldson has cemented his place as one of the most innovative and beloved creators on YouTube.
Is he though? Like, I'm sorry, I just don't even really know who he is. Like I only know all the stuff that's like happened. Like, I don't know. Like, to me, it's like I have no idea who.
Starting with simple gaming videos and comedic sketches in his early days, he has grown into a global phenomenon known for his extravagant challenges, philanthropic giveaways, and mind-boggling stunts. With over 200 million subscribers and billions of views across his videos, Mr. Beast has redefined the landscape of online entertainment.
This feels like it's supposed to be in a horror movie. Yeah, he's not beloved. Yeah. Allegedly, of course. Many allegations saying that. Yeah, and yeah, well, again, allegedly. We can't, There are many allegations. So, and so, anyway. But again, this feels like it's the start of a horror film. It's like the bakery on Oak Street, I don't know.
His meteoric rise wasn't overnight. Early in his career, Donaldson spent countless hours analyzing the platform, studying what made videos succeed, and experimenting with his own content. In 2017, his first...
So what you're saying is he watched a lot of YouTube videos? Wow. Good for him.
Major viral hit came with a video of him counting to 100,000, a task that took over 40 hours to complete. From there, his creativity only expanded as he transitioned into high-budget challenges like recreating Squid Game with a $456,000 prize pool and giving away millions of dollars in cash.
So he didn't understand what Squid Game was about, the reason why.
Prizes. Now, Mr. Beast is taking his ambitions to an entirely new level, the ancient wonders of Egypt. The revelation of Mr. Beast's latest project came during an episode of Beyond the Records, a podcast hosted by Olympian Noah Lyles. Known for pushing boundaries, Mr. Beast casually dropped the bombshell that he would be renting out all three of Egypt's Great Pyramids for an exclusive 100-hour exploration. We got all...
Okay. So like I said, so apparently this was discussed on a podcast with an Olympian. Yeah, the three pyramids which are right next to one another. Typically, usually the largest one is the one that people refer to as the Great Pyramid, but if they want to say pyramids, that's fine. I don't think there's anything wrong in calling the plural, right, the Great Pyramids. But 100 hours? That's a long time to just leave some, random dudes just to, explore. What are they going to do? You know what I mean? What... they've done so many actual things that the only thing they could do is something that would be harmful to the structure of the pyramids, if anything. Definitely not, something positive. And it's I don't know why, but it's giving me this the pseudo archaeology vibe. And then again, I can't say for certain, but it's they the Mr. Beast team, I guess, seems like they would want to flirt with, but I don't know. I could be completely wrong, right? Again, this is just my observation, based solely on my opinion, that that they would try to take on the ideas of that the pyramids actually had some secret other purpose, right? And which right, you have it being, power plants, it being, it just can never be what they are, right? Which are essentially large mausoleums, right?
3 of the pyramids of Egypt for 100 hours, he told Lyles, his excitement palpable. I'm gonna do a video where they let me explore any...
Okay, this video is fine, but it is so,
MR Beast has built a reputation for his extravagant YouTube videos and challenges, and it's clearly paid off, earning him the title of the most subscribed channel of all time. Although football...
Yeah, I don't know. I'm noticing that this is just someone talking. They're not really showing anything. But I think we get the gist. I think we get the gist, right? MR Beast, I know, right? So, pyramids are not for rent. Look, again, Ali in Discord, which, by the way, everyone should join the Discord, said that he himself looked, because he said the exact same thing. Ali is, of course, Egyptian, lived in Cairo, and said, also said, oh, you can't just rent them. But apparently they made an exception for Mr. Beast for 100 hours. But even from a just like a... even if I were to look at this from completely... Hello, Omega Star. Welcome in. Even if I were to think of this solely through even a layperson's lens, it's like, why would you let random people just go into pyramids, there is this sort of view, I suppose, that oh, well, maybe they'll find something that archaeologists and etc. couldn't find. It's like, no, that's not gonna happen, it just still sticks out to me that leaving them to explore all 3 pyramids, one, I just don't even know why. That's like what? That's essentially that's a little bit over 4 days, right? And so I just kind of don't see why they would even let them in there, because there are so many problems with, one, are they going to have a guide to take them inside? Or are they really just going to be left alone for 100 hours? I don't know. Hello, Donald Duck. Welcome in. Because typically, they just do stuff on their own, right? They don't have necessarily anybody with them. They're just filming themselves. And that kind of, again, makes me feel like the idea that they would try to play into the, conspiracy stuff, just kind of, I don't know. Just kind of makes it a bit more, I don't know. Hello, Scribbles. Welcome in. So, I don't know. Can't they build their own pyramid and use that? I wish they would. Why can't they do this at the huge, Cabela's or the Bass Pro Shops pyramid in Nashville, Tennessee? Right? There you might actually find something that no one's ever seen before, Particularly, in the men's room on the 4th floor. You know what I'm talking about? They have a reputation of trashing their sets. Right, exactly. They have a huge reputation, again, that, that many people have, allegedly shown documentation of, right? Of them, trashing their sets, not cleaning up. But now we're talking about something that is literally irreplaceable, right? Not that anything else, not that the lake or whatever was also irreplaceable, but we're talking about something that, again, is very much one of those things that you shouldn't, when little kids want to, touch things, and that if they do it, something it's gonna cause something really horrible to happen. I have not gotten the chance yet to visit Egypt. I would love to visit Egypt, but I only visited I've only been to Syria and Jordan, so. But Egypt would definitely be next on my list for sure. If it wasn't for what's going on, also Lebanon, but yeah. Hello, Scribs. Welcome on the YouTube side. So, for me, I also find it a bit strange too because they rented out all three of them, right? So I'm guessing they're gonna go into like all of the passageways. Like I in a way, I kind of don't see the point, you know? Like, I suppose I can, like tourists, like when you go there, like I've read about what, how the tours work, and it's not very, because again, there are so many sites that are closed off because they are actively being, researched, right? And actively, all the time, or being restored, or being, so it just strikes me as odd to just rent out all three of the pyramids at once. Because, like, I almost, like, is the challenge going to be that, like, 3 different people are going to go into each pyramid? Or is it going to be that all of them go into each of the pyramids? Like, that's what I was curious to find out. But, I don't know. But that does allow us to talk about what the pyramids are for. Right? So, because, again, I'm not saying it's for sure gonna happen, but I just have this, like, I feel like the idea of playing into, like, the whole conspiracy theories about the pyramids is something that, like, it gets clicks, right? Yet, again, the actual history of the pyramids and what they are and what etc. is, far more. I mean, I think that what they are is already wondrous and interesting. I don't know why there has to be a, they're secretly this or. Anyway, so we'll start with this.
You'll run across videos dealing with the subject of the Egyptian pyramids, and quite a few on the pyramids of Giza in particular. One common proposition is that the pyramids of Egypt were not, in fact, tombs, as Egyptologists will tell you, but something else. One
Hi,
video
Omega
that's got
Star.
quite a bit of attention is from the channel Universe Inside You, called Pyramids' True Purpose Finally Discovered Advanced Ancient Technology. Let's take...
Oh my gosh. And yes, if you'd like to help me, you can always do so by going to my throne, where you could support to my, emergency fund. Of course, there are other links that you can do so that are in the pinned comment with Cash App, Venmo, etc. I am so thankful for all of the help people have given me, and you are all so kind, and I honestly am so undeserving for people's kindness. I honestly, it makes me feel bad to have to ask for help sometimes, and it's. But if you could please give anything, I would be so thankful. Truly, it would mean so much to me because I need help right now. So, oh, thank you so much, Omega Star. I love you all too.
Take a closer look at this video. Examine the arguments in it. Look for signs of advanced technology, and see if we can ascertain what the true purpose of the pyramids actually was. Myths of Ancient History is aimed at dispelling common misconceptions about the past. If you're interested in ancient history, lost civilizations, and secrets from antiquity...
By the way, this video is not only very old, insofar as, like, you can tell by the site design, right? But he had 107 subscribers then. He has almost 260,000 subscribers now. So, David is doing quite well. So,
I encourage you to subscribe to the channel, because you will get lots of it. And if you find this particular video valuable, please hit the like button and comment below with your favorite takeaway. And feel free to ask any clarification questions that you may have. Universe Inside You is a channel run by Stefan Dimitrov of Bulgaria, who says the purpose of his channel is to help people to grow their, quote, spiritual, esoteric, psychological, philosophical, and extraterrestrial knowledge.
What does that even mean? What does it mean to have extraterrestrial knowledge? Like, is that knowledge about extraterrestrials? Or do they mean it in the sense that, like, you have knowledge that is from beyond the Earth, right? Like, is that what they mean? Because, I mean, that's all what extraterrestrial means. It just means outside of the Earth, technically speaking. So, like how Mediterranean means middle of the Earth, right? So I'm thinking like, yes, the knowledge of the, you know, of the high Jupiterians, right? Like, I don't know. I'm trying to think of what it would even be. Well, I'm trying to think of what extraterrestrial knowledge is. I guess I guess we'll find out, but...
Unquote. I'm noting the absence of the word historical there. Even so, he frequently dabbles in the subject of ancient history, and, regrettably, often gets his facts wrong. The particular video we're looking at was narrated by Elizabeth Firestone, who also is responsible for writing it. But seeing as she was hired by Dimitrov, I'm going to proceed in this video under the assumption that the ideas, if not the exact words, are Dimitrov's.
Oh, wow, he actually showed, like, nah, I dislike this. Oh, that's good. That's funny.
Own ideas. It is, after all, his channel. You might wonder why I'm even bothering with a channel like this, but you see, many people view these kinds of videos. They're quite popular. His video...
Oh my gosh, like even right here, look, there's only one problem. The Great Pyramid has none of the characteristics of tombs, including, I mean, yeah, maybe of modern tombs. I mean, again, like we're acting like there aren't large mausoleums to other people. I mean... You can see large mausoleums that exist even for people like, you know, like, let alone, well, like, if it's just a question of its size and function, then any large mausoleum is not a mausoleum because it's not like regular tombs. But at the same time, the ancient Egyptians did bury some of the dead elsewhere. Like, it's not as though they only, you know, placed them in the pyramids. But extravagant artifacts, again, like, one, we know why they put extravagant artifacts. I mean, again, we call them artifacts, but that was because, you know, that was something to be... Oh my goodness, thank you so very much, Omega Star. That is so kind of you. Thank you so much. Which is that, you know, they were there, right, because they were thought to accompany the dead as they, you know, in the afterlife. Ornate wall art, I mean, that's not uncommon. I mean, that's not even, like... Sealed entrances. I mean, even back in the days when the pyramids were built and they were used as tombs, as they are, they had the issue of grave robbing. So the fact that they had sealed entrances actually is very unsurprising. Because, again, you know, you have in it a sort of off, you know, out, back then anyway, you know, sort of off the beaten path location, you know, these pyramids with these propitiatory temples, right? And you have all of this gold and lapis lazuli and all of these things, right? And so it doesn't seem that strange to me. Elaborate coffins, I mean, again, like, saying that they're elaborate doesn't, like... Anyway, Like, I mean, there are elaborate coffins now. I forget where is it. I don't remember where it is, but there is somewhere in, I believe it's West Africa, but I could be wrong, where they actually make very ornate but quite unique coffins, where it's like, oh, if it wanted to be like like a fish, right? They'll make it look like a fish. If you want it to look like a Coke can, it'll look like a Coke can. If you want it to look like a chili pepper, it'll look like a chili pepper. I forget where that is, but like, yeah, it's like it's very individualized in that sense. So that's nothing. And like the mummies, I mean, just think. I always think about the fact that there were people in the 19th century and before that, right, that thought that eating or ingesting mummy, like dust, I guess, was good for your health. And I just, I don't know. Like, to me, I just don't. Oh, thank you so much, Omega Sir. That is so sweet of you to say. However, built with unique, the same materials used for electrical conductivity? I mean, okay.
It has over 14 million views. And that's not even counting the knockoffs. Like, I saw that Anonymous Official, they've plagiarized his video, and they've got almost 1 million views. That, unfortunately, results in the spreading of misinformation about ancient history, which over time can become...
Wait, Anonymous Official? Like, as in the hacktivism people? Gosh, there have been so many mummies lost to those practices. Yeah, it was rather common. Particularly among, because of the time, you particularly by the British, but it was something done throughout Western Europe in particular, but yeah. Like, essentially there are, from what I understand, and I don't know the number, I know I'm not an expert in, but yeah, I'm wondering though, so I'm guessing this must be the, like, hacktivism group, or I guess that's what they would be called, right?
Incorporated into the public consciousness, and as an educator, I feel one of my responsibilities is to provide an antidote to that. Not everyone who has watched this video by Universe Inside You has adopted New Age philosophy or become a...
Yeah, okay, this thing, it's from a show, isn't it? Isn't this thing right here, whatever this circle thing is, that's from a show. Like, he's literally just taking that out of some show. Like, I can't remember what it's called, but they had this portal thing. And I don't know, like, I do know that the Nile has receded, but I don't believe that the pyramids were built on islands like that. Now, were they a different Stargate? That's right. It's the Stargate thing. Like, he literally he's just adding just Stargate right in the middle of it. Like, I like, some of it is rendered too low. Yeah, 14 million views, right? Of Graham Hancock. Yeah, I mean, I've heard of it mostly because of David. But yeah, I've heard of it. I have heard of him. Sorry, not heard of it. Also, why do they have, like, okay, here, right, they have this entrance into the pyramid, which is actually not how typically you enter the pyramid. Cats built the pyramids. I would believe it. Alien cat gods, maybe. But I don't see why they would make a staircase that goes up and then goes down halfway through. Like, you're walking up the staircase and then you go down to go inside. Why? But then they also have this, like, random statue. But why does this one have a statue? There's nothing there. Like, yes, they did have them painted a different color, right? That obviously has, gone away with time. And also, he has his own conspiracy that includes the pyramids in human history. Oh, yeah. I mean, I'm not surprised. I also don't get what these things are. Like, I really don't get... I don't know. Like, the more I look at this, the more I'm like, is this a railway? This looks like a railway to me. Because I can almost, like, see the tracks. The ancient Egyptians did not have high-speed rail. I'm sorry.
Believer in the extraterrestrial origin of the pyramids, but they may have doubts now about the true purpose of the pyramids and wonder if there's more to them than what they've learned in school. I'll leave a link to Dimitrov's video in the description below so that you can check to make sure I'm not misrepresenting him. So let's take a look.
Mainstream historians will tell you that the great...
What? Okay, just first of all, this looks like a video game. This does not look like... I mean... Okay, this island here that is supposed to... Okay, I think I know what they're trying to do here. Because there isn't... Hello, Kay, how do you say? Welcome in, welcome in. It's so nice to see you. So there is an island in Cairo, right, that is sort of... it's not exactly this shape, but... Cairo didn't exist as such at this time. Like, it was a city that sort of was built up later. Now, it doesn't mean that there weren't areas of what is now Cairo that, you know, existed, like Fustat, right? But the capital of ancient Egypt, for the most, Ducks built the... Yeah. It's AI, but it's also just so weird. Like, why would you spend, you know, all of this gold... right, to build this huge monument. And also, like, I mean, just structurally speaking, I mean, this is going to be very heavy. I don't know. Like, I mean, there is some engineering feats here that I don't believe happened, let alone the fact that it seems like everybody has a pyramid. You know, like these weren't houses, or like, I don't know, like this is the thing. It's like, I think people go to like they see the pyramid at in Nashville, right, where it's like a Bass Pro Shop, and then they go to Las Vegas and they see the Luxor and they see it's a hotel, and they're just like, oh, since we have made pyramids that have alternate uses, therefore there's no way that it could have just been that, right? Because I still don't get, like, are these supposed to be highways or something? Like, at first I thought there were railroad tracks, but now I'm like, okay, they got freeways in ancient Egypt too? Like, and like, I don't know, this is just so weird.
Pyramid of Giza was a glorified tomb for the Egyptian...
Like, the more I look at this, the more confused. Like, what's all of this stuff? And what's with the lotus flowers? I don't know what this is supposed to be. This has to be from some show. Like, I feel like most of these ideas must have come from somewhere. But what are these random things? Like, I don't even know what I'm looking at. Like, yeah, there are, you know, monoliths that are sort of built this way, right? That, you know, have scenes. But, like, what is this thing over here? I don't know. I think it's AI, so obviously it's going to be very strange looking. But I just don't get what I'm looking at in the first place. Like, I just see a pyramid, the two lotus flowers, and then I don't even know. I just want to know what this stuff is, because I presume people live there? Do y'all remember the second never-ending story? The water was actually acidic and all the buildings shiny? You know. Let's see here. I watch Minuteman on YouTube, and even though he's pretty degrading on those who conspire about things like historical pyramids, he does a lot of videos debunking conspiracies about the past. He's an archaeologist that does educational content. Ooh. Yeah, I think I do follow Minuteman, if I remember correctly. Yeah, like, where are the flying cars, right? Like, yeah, they're very shiny. And I'm like, see, again, this is why I'm saying they went to Las Vegas, saw the Luxor, right, like, during the day, right, where it's shiny. And they're like, therefore, it must have been shiny, right?
Pharaohs. There's only one problem. The Great Pyramid has none of the characteristics of tombs. including extravagant artifacts, ornate wall art.
The art on the walls says that, like, has funerary rites written on them. Like that's like that's something that is done, right? Like they write the funerary rites, of like, oh, that the soul will go and blah blah blah, right? Like all of this stuff, and also like, name the person and blah blah blah, right? Like do all of this stuff. It's not just there for like, I mean, it is there for aesthetic reasons, of course, but it's not there just like as random art. Like, oh yeah, we're just gonna put, random paintings on the wall, of like, the mausoleum for, George Washington or something. The Days of Our Lives, yeah.
Sealed entrances, elaborate coffins, or even mummies themselves.
So here, Dimitrov claims that the Great Pyramid of Giza has none, I repeat, none, of the characteristics of tombs. This statement is simply false. First of all, it's in the middle of a necropolis.
Exactly. It's literally in the necropolis. And there are other funerary temples. That's like another thing. Like, yes, here it's that's why I was saying, like, right in front of the pyramid of Khufu, you have a funerary temple, let alone all of the other like the rest of the cemetery. Right? Rip 8 tracks. Oh yeah. Yeah. Like that's that's the thing, and this is using a modern map because here we would have that street and the ticket office, but like the causeway here literally has the funerary temple, and these pyramids here, which I'm guessing Mr. Beast didn't rent out. Of course he only rents out the large pyramids, right? Like, oh, I don't care about the mini pyramids. I only care about the. But we have other tombs. Like, it's not just.
Cemetery, and is surrounded by the tombs of the family of the king. It has a mortuary temple attached to it. Mortuary temples were places to worship dead kings.
Exactly. Like, you go here, and that's what I was mentioning earlier, right? That there are propitiatory rites that are done right here. And this is why the idea of Mr. Beast going in here. Oh yeah, I have seen how expensive VHS players are today. Going in here and then running around and fucking around with all of the stuff inside just gives me I don't know. It honestly just infuriates me to some extent because I'm just like, why? Like, what are you gonna like? What's the point? Like, you're inside of the pyramids. Okay, I get that, but what else? Like, surely there's something else that matters here, I guess, but also not. Because otherwise, I mean, again, they do have tours, and you do get to go inside in those tours, but the whole point is the mortuary temple. You descend down into the subterranean chamber, and then you start going up, and you have different passages, right? So you have the ascending passage here, the descending passage there, and you also have this entrance that's like in the middle of the pyramid as well. So again, it's not like I don't know. Just for me, I'm just thinking giving them unlimited access. By the way, that is something that was said. He's going to have unlimited access to the 3 large pyramids of Giza, right? At Giza. Not these 3, not GIA, GIB, and GIC. No. The pyramid of Khufu, Khafra, and the other one is escaping my. Can't remember.
And our conspicuous feature of tombs. It had a causeway built leading up to it, another feature of tombs. It had solar ships buried next to it, just like at the tombs of many other kings of Egypt.
I mean, this is why I think that, some amount of, like, this is why I think that there needs to be a kind of recognition that, like, an Egyptologist, right, someone who did it, like an ancient historian who focuses their research and life's work on discussing Egypt, right, wouldn't have to contend with this, right? Like, there are people who think that, like if someone has some conspiracy theory, somehow we have to treat them as though it is, like, intellectually valid, right? Like, oh, shouldn't we hear both sides? There isn't a both sides, right? What they're saying is a conspiracy theory, right? Mr. Beast is trying to locate his mummy. Oh my gosh. Well, but yeah, so again, this shows that the guy doesn't really know vis-a-vis, like, Egyptian culture, but this is where I always tell people, try to find material that actually is from an expert. Again, there are so many people that are experts, and even if even if you were to read something that is, publicly accessible, that is, because I know a lot of academic writing is behind a paywall, unfortunately. But there is so much you can access regardless. It's actually, peer-reviewed and academic. You don't even have to contend with this. Like, that's one of those things, right? Like, oh, well, this person believes X, therefore you have to listen to the other side. I don't have to, actually, because we already know that this is the case, right? This is something that has been known since since the 19th century at the very least.
Dimitrov is wrong that the Great Pyramid didn't have sealed entrances. It did, and it did have a large sarcophagus in a chamber inside it. It still does. The statement that it has no extravagant artifacts is true for all the tombs of the kings of Egypt, including those in the Valley of the Kings, with the sole exception of King Tut's tomb, because it was the only one not looted by grave robbers.
Exactly. I mean, again, David says it so perfectly that every single one of them, besides King Tutankhamun's tomb, because it was the only one that was never breached, all had all of the art, the gold, right, all of the ankhs and everything else, right, stolen, right, over a long period of time. I mean, again, think about it like this. Cleopatra, right, is closer to us, right, temporally, right, than she is or was to the pyramids being built. So this is how long ago, these pyramids are, to the point where the distance in time, so to speak, right, between Cleopatra, right, Mark Antony, Julius Caesar, like all of that stuff, is closer in time to us, right, than anything having to do with the pyramids. So I hate how much effort and time is wasted disproving people's opinions that are completely unfounded by evidence. Right. I mean, again, this is something where people are, and Deborah Lipstadt actually goes into this in her book, Denying the Holocaust, because, like, there were a lot of people who say, well, you should come and debate, quote unquote, or right, we should listen to both sides of the argument, quote unquote, right, of when it comes to the Holocaust, right? And of course, it's like she said, like, we can dispute about any, right, if you want to talk about when did this start or when did that start, or both, if you want to talk about particulars, right? But you can't. You cannot act as though a denialist, right, a Holocaust denier, is equal to something like the Holocaust happened, right? Like, that's essentially how she puts it, right? It happened. If you want to argue about anything else, but the main thing that has to be understood is that it happened, right? Like, there cannot be, Like, that is an inarguable point, right? That's where a lot of people who often, are in sort of like debate bro circles, right, think that everything can be argued. And no, there are some things that, again, we don't have to argue that the sun rises in the east, so to speak, right? We don't have to, blah blah blah. Like, we don't have to rehash every argument going back since since the founding of civilization. You don't have to do that. But one thing you especially don't have to do is to somehow think that someone who is a conspiracy theorist or a Holocaust denier or whatever, or a Nakba denialist, right, is somehow equal to a historian whose expertise, right, and research, already, already speaks volumes, literally, in many cases, past, anything they could ever bring up, so...
The statement that it has no mummies also is the case for all the tombs of the kings of Egypt, including those in the Valley of the Kings, with the sole exception of King Tut's tomb, because the mummies were removed by the priest of Egypt to prevent their desecration by tomb robbers. We have ancient Egyptian documents that say as much.
And again, this is what's very important. When it comes to historians, right, the things that we primarily look at are texts, right? Now, what texts are is a very broad category, right? Because obviously an art historian doesn't necessarily look at written documents, right? They look at texts that are of an artistic nature, right? That are painted, right? And so that is where questions about like the style and the medium, right, in which they are produced, right, are central questions in the historical methods vis-a-vis art history. Whereas for like a cultural historian, right, we would focus on right, like the interaction between any specific culture that we are looking at and how it related to and was challenged, was interacted with the other cultures around it, right? Was it a process of overarchingly assimilatory practices? Was there a desire to be more conservative vis-a-vis traditional practices? And what are those practices, right? What are they? Are they tied to something? Especially if you're looking at diasporic communities, right? It's saying, is it that those rituals or that those cultural aspects, right, how much of it has been changed in order to accommodate the fact that they are somewhere like in the United States, for example, right? So
the reason why the Great Pyramid has no ornate wall art is because it comes from the 4th dynasty, and it wasn't until the 5th that they began carving things on the walls of their pyramid.
Yeah, again, obviously this is a bit of you have to know your dynasties, right? Because you get to the 11th but again, this is where people that and a lot of times there actually are people that again don't have really any knowledge whatsoever vis-a-vis the subject they are speaking about. However, they think that because there actually was a judge that talked about this the other day. I know I saw it online, but like the people that think that that they can read like a book and some articles and sort of almost like act as though they can teach the judge, right? Like how legal proceedings work, right? Like how a judge is supposed to, you know what I mean? In a way as though they have like mastered the subject. And there is one thing, and that is different from being an autodidact. That is different from genuinely learning for, yourself. It's instead this learning that is with the aim to try to use your knowledge so as to give the semblance, right, that you can be, right, the equal of someone for whom you are not because of that initial intent, right? And I see more and more of that all the time in people that say, well, I have read this, I have read that. But it's like, yes, but you still don't know the methodology. You still don't understand this. You still don't because if you did, then you would know that that's not the book you should be reading, right? You should be reading these. You should also, blah, 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 right? There's so many different things. And this isn't to say like, oh, again, like I said, it doesn't mean that it's only PhDs that should be able to speak. Quite the opposite. It's that, again, the people that actually have the expertise and the knowledge should be the ones speaking, right? They should be the ones given the voice, especially if they are, again, when it comes to indigenous knowledges, right? Those of the knowledges of colonized peoples, etc., right? Because that's usually something that they are not allowed to express, right? Or are not given the chance to because of hegemonic discourses, right? And so, again, and like what I just said right now, right? That's something that culture historians contend with a lot, right? How much of the hegemonic discourse, right, shuts out any particular subaltern, marginalized community, right? And how does that affect that community as such, right? Historically speaking, right? So there's that. Yeah, like we see here, that obviously, if you would have studied the history of this, again, you perhaps would have known this, but I think that, whether it's the 4th or the 5th dynasty, that isn't necessarily relevant. But, again, that's someone who has studied in depth, right? But like a person that wants to study, ancient Egypt sort of in general, would at least be aware that at one point they didn't, right, have art at all on the walls of the tombs, right? And that this was a later development, which again, it doesn't mean that they couldn't have done it before. It just for whatever reason they decided to do it now in the 5th dynasty, right?
So right off the bat, Dimitrov is misleading his audience, or perhaps he just doesn't know and is repeating things.
Yeah, see, like this is where I usually try. This is perhaps where, like, again, I don't want people to misunderstand me, right? Like that's why I said, like, those who have the knowledge about any particular thing should be given the chance to speak, right? Because what you see again is like the way in which hegemonic discourses silence, right, subaltern discourses, even when the hegemonic discourse, right, historically speaking, is incorrect, right? Because anyway, but the point being that usually the presumption is, of course, generally speaking, right, that people might not be aware of this, right? Like, I'm not expecting people to know the nitty-gritty of, the history of the Inquisition when it became a national institution, right? Specifically of the Kingdom of Spain, right? Like, I'm not expecting people to tell me, oh, where was the first city that they began to do this or do that, right? What was the last city where they began to do this and do that, blah, 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 right? Because that's not, that's something that's beyond the typical frame of reference for most people, because not everybody is a subject matter expert, right? But at the same time, when it comes to a more generalized knowledge, right? Like, oh, did such a thing exist, like the Spanish Inquisition? Generally most people know that did exist, right? It was a extrajudicial arm of the essentially, of the church, run by the church in Spain, but technically, again, was an extrajudicial arm also, again, sort of for the Spanish state, right? So that's another thing to keep in mind.
He's heard uncritically.
It was, however, built with unique materials, the same materials that are used today for electrical conductivity. These facts are leading more and more historians to
Wait, I mean, electrical conductivity? I mean, what do they think they're made out of? I mean, it's not like they're made out of what does that even mean? Electrical conductivity. I mean, in the sense that like lightning could strike them, I guess. But I don't think that just like stone is particularly I don't know, that's unless they're going to tell me it's made out of some particular metal, I guess.
believe the pyramids may have had a far more useful purpose. The Pyramid of Giza was not at all a tomb, but a power plant, generating and transmitting electricity.
Hold up. When has the pyramid ever done that? When have they ever looked like this? Like, you would think that if there was all of this, I guess, circuitry, especially if it shows up on the outside of the pyramid, that at some point that would have been recorded, right? Because it's not as though like the pyramids were lost and now they have been found after thousands of years, right? Oh yeah, that's right. Like, it's just, and just like Looney Tunes said, you have to hold your horses. But I'm really wondering, because this kind of made like I don't want to say that like it makes me think of, what's that movie? Is it the one? Is it called Atlantis? Right, like the Lost World or something like that, where like everything sort of glows this blue color. Like, it's like that same color of the pyramid right here. Like, it's the same, right? I want to say it is, but anyway, regardless, the point being is that like this doesn't even make sense, because if there was all of like, just think of a power plant today, the amount of just everything that is needed in order to power it, and to move around the electricity. Another thing is, what did the ancient Egyptians have that apparently hasn't survived to the present day that needed electricity? Like, that's something that people would have remarked about, right? Because it's not as though Egypt as a civilization stayed just completely stagnant, right? Or static, I should say, right? Never being, having parts of it taken over, civil wars, whatever. Like, that only works in this idea that Egypt just like was just there for so many thousands of years, and then one day they're like, we have to hide the real reason why we have these things. Because I'm really wondering, again, if Mr. Beast is going to go into these pyramids, right? And he's going to try to find stuff that people haven't found before. That's what I think it's that last bit, right? Because he has unlimited access for 100 hours. Playing into conspiracy theories like this is just too much of a, it would get so many more viewers than anything else, right? At least I think. I don't know. I could be completely wrong. Maybe he's going to go there and like, we're going to look at some sandstone today.
To the civilization surrounding it.
Okay, so here we get to his main thesis.
Oh my gosh. What is this? This looks like, oh no. You know what this looks like? This makes me think, oddly enough, of like an image you would see. Hello, Quack Quack. Yes, you made it. Welcome in. This makes me think of like, no worries. This makes me think of like a cigarette package. I don't know why, but it does. What are those, right? This is apparently saying that the pyramids, which, by the way, Mr. Beast was able to somehow secure himself 100 hours of unlimited access to the 3 pyramids of Giza. So that's why we're bringing this up. I don't think that they know what this is right here. Like, I really think, like, this is not a generator. Like, this doesn't hold electricity, nor does it do whatever it is doing. Like, in fact, it looks like it's echoing. Like, it looks like it's putting out sound or water. I don't even know what this is. Oh, you know what? It also looks like a sort of like an 80s rock band, like, CD cover or whatever, like album cover. I don't know. It's just like the pyramids did not look like this.
That the Great Pyramid...
I mean, they did look like a pyramid, and they did have this in the middle, but not what... I mean, like, I don't know. Like, is this supposed to be, like, what makes electricity? I don't know.
Was a power plant. To be fair, this is not Dimitrov's own hypothesis. It goes back to Christopher Dunn, a machinist from Manchester, England, who has published books and articles on the subject since the 80s. There have been several variations of his theory propounded through the years, and I'm not sure where the idea that the Great Pyramid was a wireless, Tesla-like power plant came from.
Oh no, not Tesla-like. Oh, that makes it even worse. That makes it even worse. Ah, yes. Back in the day with when all of Egypt was just the land of Elons. Like, oh gosh.
But it has been making the rounds, and that's the hypothesis that Dimitrov is...
Hello, FLFNFL. Welcome in. It's so nice to see you. Tote's real. Tote happened. Yeah. The pyramids were made for CD covers 5,000 years ago. Yep, pretty much. Yeah, not Elon Musk-like pyramids. Like, to use that as a descriptor is just like, oh no, that's bad. Like, the depth and clarity of Dunn's research. What research? How do you research something and get the idea that this is a power plant? I bet that this person didn't even go to Egypt. And they live in a country that's actually, like, close to Egypt. I mean, relatively speaking, right? In comparison to the United States. Like, you can go to Egypt, for far less than you can, from the United States. But Christopher Dunn... I don't know, but Christopher Dunn sounds like a kind of like Renaissance playwright, that lived around the time of Shakespeare or something. Will astound the lay reader. I mean, see, that's the thing. So now you have someone who is acting almost as though Christopher Dunn is a subject matter expert of Egyptology, right? Hello, Hunger Games. Welcome in. Who should I pray to if I want 97? Well, you know. Yes, if you'd like to help me in some way, you can always go to my throne where you could contribute to my emergency fund. As I said, you can always do so also by going to the links in the pinned comments in both chats, which is including Cash App, Venmo, and you can always tip me on Twitch. But welcome in Hunger Games 1989. But yeah, like, I don't know, like, again, saying, like, one, this language is this is very important, right? I want to highlight this because language is actually very important here. By saying that the lay reader, right, that is putting a distance between Christopher Dunn and his readers, right? That, oh, he is not a lay person, even though he is, right? Because nobody researches about Egypt and comes out saying it's a power plant. Elon Musk is a time traveler, and he actually founded Tesla 5,000 years ago, with the pyramids, Like, that's not what happened. This is not Elon's house, okay? Christopher Dunn. Yes, I'm doing well. Thank you so much, Hunger Games. Yes, if anything, and again, don't feel obligated, of course, but if you can, I just going through a bit of a rough time right now, and again, if people can, I would really appreciate it. It's just... But by, again, saying this, and also scientists alike, right? So, by saying scientists, and that being a very broad category, right? it's also saying that people who, again, are not necessarily subject matter experts will be astounded by this. So people that have no knowledge of Egypt, right, and people that have knowledge of any other category except for, that are not Egyptologists, right, at least in a broad sense, right, like an archaeologist with, somehow would come out believing the argument that it's a power plant. But again, that is there to both distance Christopher Dunn from the lay reader, but also say that even scientists, right, even the scientific consensus, right, isn't as strong as it is seen to be, right? Yes. Also, please make sure to like.
Advocating here.
To start, it's important to comprehend the tremendous effort that went into creating these monuments.
Yeah, the tremendous effort that apparently Mr. Beast is gonna just... I don't know, like, okay, I'm trying to think, okay, you have so much money, right? You're known for doing stupid shit, pretty much. And you and your bros are gonna be, like, given free reign in ancient pyramids, right? Which have, passageways that, whatever, right? What, like, I really am just like, they're going to destroy something. Like, something is going to happen. I can't say for certain, but, like the last thing I need is, like the journal for, for Egyptian archaeology or whatever it might be called. Or, like, I mean, there's so many journals that talk about Egypt, to be quite honest. Because, like, Egyptology, Assyriology, Iranology are, like, the big... Well, also biblical archaeology, right? But still, I'm just like, oh, God, they're gonna do something. They're gonna touch something. I don't want to compare them to children, but it's like when a child is like, you're saying, don't touch this thing, and that makes them touch the thing, right? And it's just like, but in this case, they have unlimited access to the pyramids, so they can go down any of the corridors. They can, like. I don't know. That I don't think it's right. This is a huge mistake. A huge mistake. Especially because, again, even Hollywood doesn't get such access. But if they want to, like, raise their social media profile, I guess, literally, Egypt is probably one of the places on the planet that, doesn't, like, everybody has heard about Egypt, But, and the pyramids and such. Like, I don't think that it doesn't need, like, a social media account, like, advisor or something. You have Windows tonight? Oh, nice. I thought aliens built the pyramids. Clearly it wasn't that hard to build. Well, I guess we're gonna have to call the aliens to rebuild whatever they end up destroying. Mr. Beast is going to set off a hidden booby trap that hasn't been set off yet and get sealed in the pyramids forever, and we will never hear, well, Dr. Beast, I can see it now. Oh, no. Could you imagine, like, him doing his style of videos where he literally, like, I'm going to do a PhD? Oh, my gosh. That would be something. That would be something.
The pyramids of Giza are among no less than 118 of these structures in Egypt alone, and that doesn't even include those.
By the way, there are more pyramids in Sudan than there are in Egypt itself. And the largest pyramid is actually in Mexico, but like, I've always found these, like, factoids about, pyramids kind of interesting because then I think, well, you have all these other places that have pyramids, right? I mean, the city of Rome has a pyramid, for Pete's sake. Like, literally, if you go down on the metro, right, there is an area right next to the Protestant cemetery where John Keats is, the poet, is buried. There's literally a pyramid there. It was part of their defensive wall. Like, they literally have a pyramid. So, I have no faith in humanity. Watch graffiti and other rambunctious create like the pyramid parkour. Oh gosh. Like what I'm afraid of is like, there are places that are still supposed to be sealed off because, they're doing, either restoration work, which again, if you knew about how, if people knew about how, why people need to do preservation work and restoration work, why they need to do all of these things, they would know why not to mess with that. But if they're just gonna just set them free, then, I don't know. I don't know what's gonna happen. I can't predict it. I can't say anything for certain, of course. But there's just so much that sort of bothers me about this because, there are things that, have been there for thousands of years and could very easily be chipped off or broken off or, you know what I mean? Let alone, right, messing with something that could structurally damage, the interior of the pyramid.
Pyramids in other parts of the world.
Is there a reason why we should consider the pyramids in other parts of the world? The Egyptians didn't build them, so how does this have a bearing on the amount of effort the Egyptians put into building their pyramids?
Yeah, okay. The Egyptians didn't build the pyramid. No. We tend to only learn about the Egyptian pyramids. Apparently, it's the most important. Yeah, no. At first, I thought when you said it, I thought it could be a Mussolini. No, it wasn't. It was done a long time ago. Because they have the Leonine Wall, which is by the Vatican City and covers some of it. And then they have a larger outer wall of... Like, Rome is technically speaking a walled city, right? But it's the outer wall. I can't remember that one, but they actually built a pyramid. So if you want to see a pyramid in the middle of Europe that was built by, ostensibly speaking, Europeans, you can always go there and also go visit John Keats, gravesite. Because that's actually the Protestant cemetery. It's literally at the edge of southern Rome. Because I actually, at one point, there's a university sort of going that direction, and it's one of the, but it's actually, it's interesting, FLF. You are right, though, in that it's the direction in which you would, as it were, cross paths with EUR, as it's often called, right? I don't blame you for being bothered. Mr. Beast is a child and an adult. We'll see, the issue, I don't want to presume, right, that vandalism is going to occur, but when you give someone unlimited access, right, what does that mean in the context of something ancient? You know what I mean? What does that mean in the context of things that are literally irreplaceable, right? That's what bothers me, is that, it's not as though, as far as I know, that they're going to have a guide that's going to be watching them. In fact, if you go to Egypt, again, David's spoken about this before, usually you have someone from I think it's the Ministry of Tourism, I think, that usually is there to, go with you when you go off to these sites, right? But again, if they're going to have unlimited access and not have people there, then that opens up the chances for, problems.
Is irrelevant.
Given our current understanding.
And yeah, bringing up the other pyramids, it's I don't know what to say, just other than, yeah, there are other pyramids in the world. It doesn't, like, you know, like, I mean, there are pyramids literally just outside of Mexico City. I mean, I showed them on, you know, in Teotihuacan, right? The Pyramid of the Sun, the Pyramid of the Moon, you know, it's, the main difference is that Cairo has built up all of its suburbs, all of its urban sprawl right up to just in front of the pyramids and going past them on one direction, as far as I can remember anyway.
Understanding of how early civilizations built their monuments, it would have taken no less than 20 years.
See, this looks like a video game. Because, like, yeah, you see this, but, like, what is all this? You know? And why is all of the farming in little squares? And what, I don't even know. What are these things? They look like dragons or something. There's like dragons in the middle of the Nile. Oh my gosh. But like, yeah, like yeah, I mean, generally speaking, yeah, I mean, it's like, I always never understood, or pardon me, that makes no sense. I never understood why it was the case that even though pyramids are built now, right? Again, I look at the one in Las Vegas or the one in Nashville, right? Again, they're glass pyramids, I understand, but somehow they can't imagine that a pyramid could be used for, like, I mean, like, what is a Bass Pro Shop? How is that any different from using it as a mausoleum? Like, I mean, you know what I mean in terms of, like, utility. Like, I don't really get it to some degree, so.
Years to build these so-called tombs, and that's if no less than 20,000 workers worked daily.
Dimitrov is taking this 20 years, 20,000 workers figure from the Greek historian Herodotus, who visited.
By the way, just to also add another point here, you know what Herodotus called the land that is between the River Jordan and the Mediterranean Sea? In the 5th century BCE, no less. Palestina. So Palestine. So it was called Palestine even before the Second Temple period and all of that stuff. So just so everybody knows. Even Herodotus calls it Palestine in the 5th century BCE. I love how pyramids are carefully planned with knowledge. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, no. Today's pyramids, they don't really care. I mean, like, it's literally was built because it's like right next to the water. So then that way you would have like the most advertising space, pretty much. But yeah, Herodotus back in the 5th century BCE talked about the land between the River Jordan and the sea, Mediterranean Sea, and he called it what it was called. Palestina.
Visited Egypt in the 5th century BCE, and who was told this about the Great Pyramid by the Egyptians of that time, which was 2,000 years after the Great Pyramid had been constructed.
Exactly. Again, 2,000 years. That's the 5th century BCE, right? So, like Herodotus, again, I go back to the example. Cleopatra's closer to us in time, right, than she is to the pyramids. Right? Like, we are closer temporally to, like, Mark Antony and, Julius Caesar and Cleopatra and their whole, like, menage a trois, right, than we are to any of the pyramids having been built, right? So, an interesting thing to keep in mind. Herodotus, he's often known, he's written what is called the Histories. He's often called in Eurocentric views of history, the father of history. Because again, he wrote the history of the places he traveled to. However, sometimes there are questionable accounts of some of the more far-flung areas that it was said to have traveled to. But definitely, we know he traveled to Egypt and to Palestine, etc.
Those same Egyptians told Herodotus that the Great Pyramid was a tomb built for the...
Exactly. I mean, like, again, even in the 5th century BCE, they still knew what it was for. It was a tomb. That's all it is. Yeah, usually you can get them in one volume. They're very cheap editions too. Like if you get like the Dover edition, they're like $5.95, I think. So if you have Amazon Prime, not only can you get one free subscription a month by linking your Amazon Prime to your Twitch account, which you can of course then use it to subscribe to a streamer of your choice, which hopefully is me, but it doesn't have to be. But if you do have Amazon Prime, then you also don't have to pay for the shipping, so you can very much enjoy the lowered cost of the book. Yeah.
king known in Greek as Cheops and in Egyptian as Khufu. So why Dimitrov is accepting one piece of information they gave and rejecting others, I do not know.
To this day, historians still can't prove exactly.
Wait, are those... Oh my goodness gracious. Oh, thank you so much, Scribbles. Thank you so much for your subscription. Yay, with Prime. Thank you so very much. I appreciate that. Yay, I am the chosen one. For a second there, I thought these were woolly mammoths. I'm not gonna lie. Like, I literally looked at, like, they don't, like, honestly, don't they kind of look like woolly mammoths? I still don't know what these things are. Like, they look like it has wings or something. That's why I'm like, are these dragons? And also, like, I like how, even though they're right next to the River Nile, somehow it's still just desert as well. Yeah, they look like woolly mammoths. I'm like, I think you're getting your, I don't know. It's just weird.
How or when they were built.
We do have a good idea.
So, again, it's these three pyramids that Mr. Beast will rented and will have unlimited access to for 100 hours for a video. So, please don't break anything. I swear, if they do anything stupid, if they do anything to, like, that does active harm to the structure of the... I'm gonna be so mad. They do have trunks, true. I think they're supposed to be sails. Maybe. I guess that would make sense.
When the pyramids were built, all the pottery you find at Giza looks like the pottery of the time of Khufu, Khafre, and Menkaure of the 4th dynasty.
Menkaure, okay. Menkaure. So this is Khufu, this is Khafre, and this is Menkaure, right here. That's the typical order. And right here at the base, sort of right here on this pyramid to the right, is where you see the museum. Because again, it should also, like, I don't know. I'm just like, I don't know. I don't want structural damage.
Several rounds of carbon dating have been conducted on materials in the Giza pyramids, showing that they come from the mid-3rd millennium BCE. It's true that the carbon dates vary by several centuries, but not by millennia. Archaeologists believe that the variation in the carbon dates has to do with the Egyptians reusing wood. Carbon dating can only show when the trees were cut down. But primarily, we date the pyramids by their position in the development of Egyptian architecture and material culture over time. So
this is a very good point, right? That it wasn't as though the culture that we now understand to be like ancient Egypt always constructed pyramids in the way how they do now, right? In the same way, we know that there were, like, you had the mastaba, right, which was a structure that went underground and had, again, a funerary space up above. The step pyramid, right, which, from what I understand, the way how they built their step pyramids was in a way that it still was going towards having one central point of access to go down into the earth. So, which is different from the way how the Mexica and the Maya would have done.
Don't assess the pyramids of Giza in isolation, but within the context of Egyptian architectural history.
Exactly. Like, this is the thing as well. Context is everything when it comes to archaeology. This is why you don't remove things from, like, if you are participating in a citizen scientist type of thing, or you're visiting, right? This is why many places tell you, please do not take anything from here, right? Don't take the rocks, don't take this, don't try to, because what you end up causing sometimes by removing things out of their context, which was done before, is that then you have a hard time placing it back in whatever time period it was supposed to be in, right? Like when they look at essentially like the garbage pits of older civilizations, right? You have, you can tell, right, sort of when, like, around what time the pottery changed. You can also tell from other things, right, like when you begin to see these other forms of pottery or other forms of writing, right? Oh, well, when did they start writing stuff in cursive, right? Why is it that now they make pottery using a more grayish tone clay instead of the reddish tone clay? Blah, 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 right? But, like, all of those things are important to understanding,
We can see the evolution of pyramid design, from mastaba tombs to the step pyramid of Djoser to the failed pyramid attempts of Snefru to the pyramids of Giza.
And again, like, look at how massive these wonderful things are, right? I mean, the fact that they have survived for so long and that we can still go and visit them is something that honestly just has me in awe all the time. Because, like, it was the same thing when visiting other historical sites, both in Latin America, the United States, right? Because there are many things, like if people can go visit, the area of Cahokia, let alone other places, right? But, like, just the fact that you can even see this up close, let alone go in it. Yes, ad break in about 3 minutes is just something that still, and I think will always, to some extent, blow me away. But
he's right. We don't know precisely how the pyramids were built, but we know the Egyptians built them. We have Egyptian mathematical documents that show the math behind pyramid creation.
Like, yeah, the math was mathing in that case.
And people have demonstrated that it was within the realm of Egyptian technological know-how to build them. There's a papyrus document called the Diary of Merer, which is a logbook written by an Egyptian overseer who documents the transportation of limestone blocks during the reign of Khufu from the quarry at Tura on boats on the Nile to the Akhet Khufu. The Akhet Khufu is the name of the Great Pyramid, according to inscriptions present in tombs dated some 200 years later.
Yeah, so again, like, this is why when you have people that kind of, like, just deny all of this evidence and instead want to say, actually, because again, like, one of the things that David noted was that when it came to Herodotus, which I usually find that when you have someone who is trying to claim to speak with some authority on a subject that they don't have necessarily any actual expertise about or any knowledge about, right? Any, either experiential or cultural, etc. knowledge, you tend to see them do a very similar rhetorical move, which is they begin to appeal to, like, a very specific, in a very specific way, right? Older authorities, right? Like, they begin to quote Herodotus or Thucydides or, even quote, stuff from, Plato or Aristotle. That's different, of course, if you have people that, like, that's their area of expertise, right? Obviously, if you have someone who's talking about ancient Greece, they're going to quote Aristotle, Plato, etc. But when you have someone that is trying to say that actually, no, the pyramids are this thing, and they will like sort of quote something and not contextualize the quote so that then they can use it for a hypothesis to prove, supposedly, right, a hypothesis that goes against, right, what the established, right, archaeological, historical, and, you know, even in this case, engineering consensus would be, would be, you know, very difficult. So again, to keep in mind, right, we have so many documents that exist, and a lot of these are at the Egyptian Museum, which is in Cairo. Again, if I were to go to Cairo, I probably would. I mean, I know that the pyramids and the Egyptian Museum, etc. I know that those are like now. I mean, they are very touristy things, but I think that they are worthwhile regardless. Because again, and even then, right, there are things. Oh, the paleta man is here. Anyway, there are things even within the museum in Al-Qahira, right, in Cairo, that have never been put on display, right? Like there are so many things that, you know, because one, of course, the museum has only so much space, but also there were some things that they're still doing lots of research on, right? And a lot of it requires technologies that haven't been acquired yet. For example, like there were these burnt scrolls, I believe, from Pompeii, just to sort of analogize very quickly, that for a long time, you know, people didn't want to open it up because they knew it would essentially fall apart. But later on, they were able to get technology that essentially could, as it were, scan it, right, and make out what was said on it. And now we're able to know what it says on those scrolls, right? And so a lot of it is, you know, people waiting for the techniques and also just purchasing that technology, right? Because, you know, a lot of the humanities and social sciences, like when it comes to academia for sure, are being, you know, always have their funding cut, let alone public institutions such as museums, etc., right? So
report the names of all the 3 pyramids at Giza. As a side note, the Egyptian religious belief, the Akhet, is the place in which the king undergoes the final transformation into an Ak. That's the spiritual being one becomes after death. The fact that it's called the Akhet Khufu indicates that the pyramid had a mortuary purpose. Yeah, we can't prove exactly how the pyramids were built, but how is that relevant? We don't know exactly how many things in many cultures were created, but we have the objects, so we know that they were made. So this is a red herring because...
Yeah, like it is kind of like unless we know exactly how they built it, like step by step, each stone has to be accounted for. Then otherwise I can say whatever I want. That doesn't even make sense. Like, okay, sure, yeah, you can say whatever you want about it, regardless. I mean, it's like that's just fishing for an excuse, but yeah, I guess calling it a red herring would make sense, but it's also just like completely unnecessary. I mean, it doesn't really, it's not as insightful of a contention, because again, just because we don't necessarily know how yet, right? That's the thing about archaeology and history, right? Like, and with you know, just for all the realms of knowledge, right, is that when it comes to, for example, historians, like the stuff that will be written now, right, will still have lots of validity in the years to come, but there will be things, right, that will change, right, what historians have concluded now, right, because there are things that have yet to be, right, discovered, right? Texts that have yet to be, you know, sort of contextualized within a particular aspect, right? Or let alone, right, other documents that would say, again, how, but we do have evidence that everything it would have taken for the Egyptians to build the pyramids, and of course their own depictions of like things like this, right, were all there. So it was possible. There are depictions of it. There are logbooks of the work. The materials are there, and so so it all fits. Therefore, one can conclude that that's how it happened, right? Power Shave remained in power. Welcome in, by the way. Sorry, I was like,
Because the question of how the pyramids were built is a different question than what the purpose of the pyramids was. We may not know.
Yeah, exactly. Oh, thank you so much for gifting Power Shave remained in power. A tier 1 sub. Thank you so very much, Omega Star. But yeah, like, saying that we don't know why it's built, or pardon me, how it's built, doesn't mean, therefore, how come we only now realized that that was very fancy? What was very fancy? How come we only now realize that the pyramids weren't mainly built by slaves? Well, for one, there was a belief for quite a long time, right, that like the Exodus story was real, right, or spoke about a real thing, a real event, when that, is not the case, right? Like Israel Finkelstein, a very famous biblical archaeologist, wrote in the Bible Unearthed. You haven't heard of Exodus? It's the second book in the Torah. Oh, I see. It's the story that so in Genesis, it sort of ends with this story of Joseph, right, who had the multicolored coat, right, that his brothers, right, essentially, that they hated him, and they essentially put him, they trapped him, and then they sold him into slavery, right, which got him into Egypt. He eventually became the like Grand Vizier, to even use that language, or like the Prime Minister, quote unquote, right, of Paro, or Pharaoh, the Pharaoh, right? And then you had these generations of people living then there was like some kind of essentially that there was like a drought, right? And lots of crop failure. At least that's kind of what the story implies. And then you have the moving of the rest of Joseph's brothers, right, to Egypt. Yeah. And so then it's this belief that then other people came by, and literally the way how it narrates this is that essentially, again, that God essentially made it so that that women could bear, like 6 children at once. Like everybody was like, a set of sextuplets, right? Again, so to speak, right? But the main thing is that there were a lot of people there, right, that were apparently, ancient Hebrews, and that they were enslaved in Egypt, right? And so for a long time, that belief really was that, oh, they really were enslaved, right? So, yeah.
Exactly how a temple was made, but we still can know what a temple is for. Same with a pyramid. I hope he knows that ancient history and archaeology can't prove exactly anything, ever. All of our...
Yeah, again, it's the same with like this is the issue when people say like, oh, well, history has to provide this quote unquote objective, ultimate view of everything. That has never been the case. Like that does not happen. That does not happen. Like there's no thing that we can absolutely for all, for all certainty. Like I actually remember, I can't remember, but it was a very famous philosopher of science, essentially saying that science is not actually, that doesn't actually tell you what is true. It actually tells you what isn't true, right? It is a better way of thinking about it, right? Because so many people, when they lock on to like, oh, so the science says this thing, right? They again, because like other academics, right, scientists are also always experimenting, right? There are always new hypotheses, and in fact, that's part of the discussion at the end of any scientific paper, where where scientists will put, right, because obviously their articles are very different from a historian's articles, right, generally speaking. And so they will even say, well, I couldn't do this, but people could look into these things, right? But like that's the thing, is like people act as though like, oh, we're here to tell you the 100% absolute, end all be all thing, and that's going to be that is going to be there forever. No. Everything that we do is always based on the idea of consensus, science included, right? Like that's why we know that something like vaccination is good, right? Like that's why people who try to do anti-vax stuff always have to go to the fringe cases, because that's all they have, right? And then say that microbiologists, doctors, etc., right, that because they have a consensus, which is based on, again, scientific fact, as of one might say, right, that somehow they should not be listened to anymore, right? Same thing with historians. Yes, there are historians that wrote about, even like the state of California. There are historians of like the 80s that have so many things that we now understand to have been the consensus at that time, but now we know are not the case, right? Like how they talk about Mexican people, for example, how they talk about the indigenous people, right? How they talk about the Anglo settlers, right? Also, right, it has changed. So, hello, the big room. Welcome in, welcome in. It's so nice to see you. I hope you're doing well. So again, like, this is what I've often said, like history and other things, right? And you can even read, Bruno Latour's Laboratory Life, right, on the social construction of scientific facts, is that like people like to think, right, that we can offer you, quote unquote, like the answer to something, right? This doesn't mean, however, that like all of our research is nothing, right? It means that we do all of our research with the fact in mind that we could be wrong, right? Knowing that we could be wrong. And that's why, I even say it on stream, I don't mind being wrong, right? I actually want to know what is, more, right? Especially if it's something that illustrates, right, something that I didn't know prior, right? Something that, again, fills the gap of my knowledge, right? And I'm always willing to defer to people that are experts, like, for example, ancient history when it comes to David, right? Microbiology when it comes to homozygote, right? Like, it's not, oh my goodness. Thank you so very much, McGoggles. I really appreciate that. That is so very kind of you. Thank you so very much. Very, very kind of you. And yes, if you'd like to support me in some way, just like McGoggles, you can always do so by going to my throne or to any of the links in the pinned comments. Again, I am, in any way you can help, I would appreciate it. And obviously, only if you can, take care of yourself first by far, but if you can help out, please. I really do need, But I think in this world, it can be very scary to be wrong due to those who critiques you harshly. It can get a lot of people defensive. I understand that. It takes a lot for people to get for being wrong. For some people, I used to struggle. Yeah. Like, again, like, that's the reason why I say that, like, I don't, like, through my research, right, there have been times where, in my own work, right, where it's like, later on, right, there were things that I had written on that once new stuff had come out, right, that wasn't available before. Now I was able to, change my perspective on those things, right? And that's part of what you're supposed to do, right? Like, that's, as it were, like, that comes with the job, right? That's part, that's, oh, thank you again, McGoggles. That's so sweet of you. But yeah, like, I mean, just like David said right here, right? Like, anybody that's trying to say, oh, 100% this is true, right? Yeah. In fact, I'm going to go back just a little bit just to go back to where he said that.
Made, but we still can know what a temple is for. Same with a pyramid. I hope he knows that ancient history and archaeology can't prove exactly anything, ever. All of our evidence is circumstantial. That's just the nature of the research we do. That's because scientific reasoning is inductive. Conclusions are drawn empirically. We should be talking about whether certain claims are warranted rather than whether they are proven. And then...
Yeah, exactly. Like, I think to me that's a very good way of thinking of it, right? Like, yes, everything is... That's the reason why I always say, like, particularly when it comes to history, it's a hermeneutical process, right? And it's if we can make it's if our claims can be substantiated, right, by the evidence, right, so that our claim, our central thesis, right, and our sub-theses, right, can be proven, right? And that actually, in fact, the fact that he uses warranted and unwarranted is actually funny because that's actually the terminology I use myself, is warranted and unwarranted, right? So yeah, like, that's precisely the point, right? We have to, we look at the evidence, right, and it's a preponderance upon that evidence. It's not, we know with absolute certainty that this, like, for example, like, I once gave the story of a young man whose surname is Garcia, who was, as far as we know, disappeared and then murdered by the Texas Rangers, right? Even though we have all of this evidence that surrounds, right, that case, we don't know, technically speaking, right, that they did that. But all of the evidence leads us to conclude that was the case, right? Because the other option, right, the one put forward by the Texas Rangers, was that he ran off to Mexico. And yet that doesn't, like, there was never any evidence even back then in the 1930s to make that claim substantiated, right? So that's why, again, all of the evidence that's why, like, this is why our bibliographies are full of many different things that we've read, right, and contended with, and why we actually do disagree on certain things, right? Like, when I do write, academic articles, it's not as though I only put people that I agree with, because that isn't necessarily the well, one, you should show that, of course you have disagreements, but one, you will have disagreements, right? That's another thing. Like there are some people for whom, like, even when it comes to, like, genocide studies, that want to keep as close to the UN definition as possible, right? Even though its history is fraught, right, with different political issues, right? As opposed to those of us that take a far more expansive view, right? That even Raphael Lemkin, the man who coined the term genocide, thought should be included. But again, that's something that you have these different contentions in the discipline, but that's the point. So
we should choose the explanation for which there is the most warrant, until and unless a better explanation comes along. I am certainly willing to do that, and if Dimitrov or anyone else presents a better evidenced explanation for the pyramids, I would switch over. I'll let you decide, though, whether the evidence for Dimitrov's proposal is stronger than the proposal that the pyramids were tombs. You also might ask yourself, is Dimitrov holding himself to the same standard that he holds Egyptologists to? Does he prove exactly how and when the pyramids were built? Or is he also using inductive arguments? Any proposal about the purpose of the pyramids, say that 10 times fast, the proposal about the purpose of the pyramids, any proposal must explain what we see in all the pyramids, not just one, or else it doesn't account for all the evidence. If your hypothesis considers some evidence and ignores other evidence, it's not a viable hypothesis.
Again, this is why, right? And again, just to reference, like, this is why, for example, like when it comes to discussing any topic, right, you have to read widely on that, right? And this is where, again, you will have disagreements with different scholars, right? This scholar contends this. However, we know now that blah, 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 right? Although this scholar argues that blah, 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 and I concur with their conclusions, I disagree with blah, 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 right? Like, that's what's supposed to happen. And that's why it involves you having to try to research a subject first without already having a conclusion in mind, right? Like, there are many people who think that going in with a conclusion in mind and just finding the stuff to prove it somehow is like a valid form of academic writing. And it's like, no, that's actually the exact opposite way of how you should do that, right? Your mind should be open when you are doing your research to the fact that even a position that you might kind of lean towards might be disproven in your reading, right? And there is a lot of, like, especially with a lot of people that, like, after October 7th suddenly tried to become, subject matter experts, in 12 days or less, right? For 9 payments of $99.99, right? There's a lot of lack of method in that, right? A huge lack of method, because what you get is them either just regurgitating points that other scholars have said, right? And you also get this idea that history, right, is just an accumulation of factoids, which it is not. Like, yeah, obviously history does involve us talking about events in history, but even what we consider, right, something notable to consider as an event, right, are things that historians contend with, right? Like, why is it that we give credence to this being considered something as opposed to that being considered an event, right? Those are fundamental things that, again, really show that even though they can, read as many PDFs while streaming as they want, they're not actually getting an education from them, right? They're reading them already with the conclusion in mind, which means that they are essentially reading them discriminating from the get-go, right? Literally discarding whatever they don't want to say, or rather what they don't want the book to say, or what they don't want the article to say, and instead only focusing on what they do want to say.
Even if you argue that your proposal applies only to the Great Pyramid, it still needs to explain the existence of the other pyramids, because you need to give a reason why the Great Pyramid should be separated from the rest of the pyramids. when it comes to...
Yeah, and then this is a huge thing, right? Like, this even comes down to, like, when you use a particular scholar, right? Why is it that you chose, right, to, use this scholar's theoretical framework or this scholar's, argument, right, to sort of bolster your own? But you have to account for those things, right? Why is it that, you're only focusing on, say, when you're talking about the history of the United States, why is it that you only focus on the 13 colonies, right? The ones that were colonized by Britain, right? Then you have to have an answer for why you don't consider New France and New Spain and all of the other areas, right? Because then that changes the nature of what you're talking about, right? Because then we're talking about particular relationships vis-a-vis land, right? Vis-a-vis the idea of property, vis-a-vis the idea of whiteness, indigeneity, etc., 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 right? And again, this is just me talking about the 13 colonies. Let alone anything after that fact, right? Like, if we're just going to talk about 13 colonies, that means, are you talking about them until 1776 or 1783 or 1789? Like, why are you choosing the time period you are choosing, right? Like, you have to justify those things. Why is it that you think that the history should end here and not go further or be shorter, right? And that is a big part of, in when you're writing that paper and you're asking those questions and you have that thesis already, right? When you're introducing your subject, you will, in essence, explain, right? I am focusing on this particular time period because I'm talking about this specific thing, right? Like, I'm looking at when all of the chartered companies of colonization were still in operation in the 13 colonies, right? So then that gives you a direct timeline of, that's the reason why it only goes from 1608 to 1721 or whatever, right? Right, and that justifies it right there. Like, you're only doing it when they had active colonization efforts, right? Once they already were colonies that had, large amounts of people living there, a lot of those companies, stopped existing. So then, that's something you also have to contend with, right? As sort of going through your writing, towards, usually the end, right? Where you open up and say, right, although I focused only on this time period, of course, the reasoning why the companies decided to shut their operations down or why they, whatever, right, that is something that someone else can aggregate to our knowledge of, right? So,
purpose. Unfortunately, what we find is that Dimitrov looks at evidence from only one pyramid to draw conclusions about all the pyramids, even though the layouts of the pyramids differ from one another.
This leads us to ask, what resting place for the dead could possibly be so important that it would warrant such phenomenal effort, time, and precise engineering? Even without...
I mean, even saying that is almost like, that's almost, yeah, okay, yeah, those are sails, I see them now. Yeah, they are ships. But, like, even saying this is very insulting. Like, why would they even need to have it? It's not like they need, I mean, technically, Congress doesn't have to meet in a huge building with neoclassical architecture. Why have slaves put in all of that effort, right? Like, you know what I mean? Like, it's like literally that, it's like, again, it was there to represent a very particular racial, economic, social, right, and many other things paradigm, right, which was to be enforced, right, in the creation of a separate capital that was only supposed to be, at least in its initial ideas, right, it's supposed to be as a capital only for, right, official business, right, something that in many ways was completely alien at the time, right? Like the idea of having an administrative capital, right, that was completely devoid of permanent residence, right? Just, there is no, like the closest thing I can say is like it would be like, but again, it also would ignore what's outside of the gates of Versailles. But Versailles would be the only other example, right, where all of the nobles had to go to Versailles, right? But there still is a town of Versailles,
Knowing that they have nothing in common with regular tombs, you only need to stand before them to realize that's a lot of work for a cadaver.
Dimitrov commits here what we call the historian's fallacy, which is to judge the actions of past societies by the values of today, or in this case...
Yes, this happens a lot, and you also see this too with people trying to justify things, like with the idea of like a modern understanding of, race or, different concepts like terrorism or, indigeneity, etc., right? Like, you cannot, and this is something that, again, I've spoken about before, right? Like even Engels talks about it in one of his works, right? That is to say that when people now, right, it's interesting to see how far along we've gone actually in the sort of like pulling apart of the industrial nuclear family, right? Like it's taken a long time, right? Because it was so impressed upon people, right? But it's already, it essentially is doesn't really hold as much weight in society at all anymore. But that's because of, many different reasons. But when people read like the story of Lot, right, and his daughters, right, again, we're talking about a tribal society that at the time, anybody in the clan that lived in the same, that could be as distantly related as, not related at all, but were part of that clan, would have called him father, right? Especially if he's the leader of the clan, right? And that's one thing that often people don't understand, is that families do not exist in the same way that they existed back then. Same thing with the idea of like even looking at like even the Holy Family, quote unquote, right? Like people like to now look at it through the lens of, Mary being this doting mother, right, type, and like almost like as though they lived in like the 50s, and then like the father going, Joseph going off to work, right? And when he's off to work, right, then the angel Gabriel appears, right? It's like, no, like again, we still live, we live in a time and place where, one, that's already outdated, but two, doesn't even make sense for the time period we're talking about, because again, like the idea of Filius Deus, right, or the son of a god, let alone God, as such, right, wasn't exactly a strange concept at the time, right? Let alone the fact that you had someone who wasn't even Judean, right? He was Galilean. In fact, that's the reason why, like in Hebrew, you usually refer to Christians as Nuzrim, right? Like Nazarenes is closer to that, right? Not Judeans, because Christ wasn't from Judea, he was from Galilee.
It's Dimitrov's own values. He can't see why anyone would put so much effort into building tombs, because he himself would never put that much effort into it. What he is failing to appreciate is how important the afterlife was to the ancient Egyptians, and the things they preferred to invest their efforts into. He would do so if he were better read in the ancient Egyptian writings.
Yeah, like again, this is the point that I'm talking about, right? There are people who, again, will read, like a few, choice texts with their intentions on their sleeve, so to speak, right? And usually it's to serve the purpose of like coming off as correct, right, on the right side of a debate, right, as winning the debate. But instead of actually trying to contend with the evidence as a whole, and then trying to formulate their opinion based off of that, and then being able to reference, right, those things, instead what we get is, well, this, and this, right, like, this person said this, like, however, I don't think that, right, and then they will say things that are based on, again, the fact that they haven't actually gone in and spent the time to, learn that. And again, this doesn't require you to have a PhD, right? This doesn't require you to have a master's degree. It doesn't require you to have to go to university at all, right? But again, this is, like, as David is saying, right, someone who, like, hasn't even read Egyptian texts themselves, of which, again, they are available in pretty much every language on the planet, right? Like, ancient Egypt is one of those things that's just, like, very, very well known. I mean, it's in Arabic, I've seen stuff even in Nahuatl, literally in Mexico, in Nahuatl, they have stuff about the Egyptians, so.
Egyptologists, those today with the most broad and thorough understanding of ancient Egyptian society.
See, I like the fact that he uses broad and thorough, right? Because that's precisely what a subject matter expert is supposed to do. A broad understanding of the subject, right? So that, like, for example, I can teach Introduction to World History, right? Because I technically can teach about other parts of the world, right? Even though my emphasis is typically in Latin America and, Jewish history, right? Which is very, Mediterranean-centric, one might say. And also, like, Europe, to some extent, beyond a certain point, also involves, a lot of different parts of Europe, too. But still, a large part of the Middle East and North Africa and South and Central Asia, etc., etc., means that, like, it's not as though it's alien to me, the idea that I would have to teach something like that. Same thing, too, with, teaching something that's very specific to my research, right? Like, the Spanish Inquisition, right, and its role. Well, I guess I don't want to be that specific, but the history of the Spanish Inquisition, from its foundations to whatever, like to 1571, right? That would be, again, something that I also could teach, right? Because that's even more in depth. But there's a broad knowledge you have to know, right, in order to be a historian, but also a thorough knowledge in your fields of expertise, right, that allow you to even begin in the first place. And that, again, that doesn't necessarily require you to have to be in the academy like I am, but it does require you to read the stuff or to interact with the stuff and actually get to know the stuff, right? Instead of just forming a hypothesis sort of out of thin air and then just saying, well, it must be true. Do you know some hieroglyphics? Off the top of my head, I know I can sometimes recognize some of them, but I wouldn't say that I would be a very good person right now to ask for that. It's interesting about talking about hieroglyphics. One thing that I always found kind of interesting is the fact that we are taught that it was during, like Napoleon's invasion of Egypt, right, where he tried to conquer it, right, for the French Empire, or for whatever France was at the time, I guess. That, we have the Rosetta Stone and blah, 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 and that's how we discovered that yada, 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 right? Well, it actually turns out that during what is often called the Islamic Golden Age, although, again, we tend to avoid terms like that, but during the Abbasid Caliphate, right, we have scholars, right, that are already transliterating, right, and writing about, like, going into the the mausoleums of different pharaohs. And oh yes, those are that's the curse of Ra. Hello, Jelly, welcome in. um but they essentially, sort of going centuries before, I mean, we're talking about like the 11th century. So again, well before the 19th, when Napoleon got there, by almost like 800 years before. But a lot of that stuff was sort of, again, is never really foregrounded in the same way, because they will say, oh well, they did it because they wanted to use it for hermetic purposes or whatever. And it's like, most of the writing of Isaac Newton is about hermetic stuff, quote unquote, right? Yet we still have to learn his I mean, I don't think everybody has to go and learn his Principia Mathematica, but they at least have to learn, right, Newtonian physics, at least some of it, right? We don't brush it off, the fact that he was most interested in alchemy, right? Like, he's more, like, again, he wrote more about alchemy than almost anything else. And yet he's remembered for apples, an apple falling down from a tree is a completely apocryphal story.
After examining all the pyramids and looking at all the Egyptian writings about the pyramids, possess substantial evidence that the pyramids were tombs. I think it might be helpful to review it.
And again, it's like this is the same thing with, like, for example, with when it comes to like the Inquisition. Obviously, there were very many trials, right? But a lot of them were like, they had the essentially, alchemy is totally legit science. Well, yeah, I mean, in fact, I actually remember there was a really interesting paper that was talking about how, like, finance, right, like finance itself, like Wall Street, right, that it itself was alchemy. And I think there once was a book that came out about, like, it was about Wall Street and, like, Federal Reserve and, like, all, just like the finance world, right? And I think it's called the alchemists, to refer to them, because so much of alchemy was to transmute, as they would have said, right, base metals, right, and by base they mean lesser, right, into gold, which is, but again, like, what you have is, like, someone who, like, for example, like, when it comes to, say, Israel and Palestine, right, like, oh, I've read, XYZ book, but have you, like, this is where, like, this is where there is a difference to be made, right? Have you read the human rights reports? Have you made and this isn't a thing to be like, oh, you can't ever have an opinion. No, quite the opposite. It's asking you if you've read these other things, because it becomes very clear that your opinion is based on very limited evidence, right? Especially when you set off, or you set out, right, to prove a point, as opposed to actually try to gain knowledge on that. I briefly got into Paracelsus for a bit. Interesting. Yeah, I mean, I'm definitely very much I'm very much into well, I've read through, well, if one can even put it that way, Newton's Principia Mathematica, and also Alfred North Whitehead's, or is it Alfred or Albert? Anyway, Whitehead's Principia Mathematica, and also Process and Reality. And yeah, no, I've just and also just like the different discourses when it comes to calculus, and sort of the implications of calculus and other related I guess, mathematical topics, because I mean, like, it's very interesting because, like, oftentimes somehow people think that mathematics is about something more concrete, but also at the same time mathematics is something about something completely abstracted. It's very interesting. But anyway.
Number 1. The ancient Egyptians tell us they were tombs.
Yeah, it's the same thing. Like, for example, like with people that deny, certain aspects of what happened in the occupied parts of Europe during World War II against Jewish, Roma, and Sinti people, queer people, etc. Right? There are Germans that say what they are, right? Like, they call it a Vergassungskeller, right? They're the ones that, write, they're the ones that order the Zyklon B. They're the ones that, have blah, 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 right? Like, let alone the witnesses, right? Everybody else who are saying what it is. Let alone, and again, even if we go back further in time, right? Like there are people that try to argue somehow that the Inquisition wasn't that bad, right? I'm not even joking. And this is why I don't like Inquisition jokes, because it was bad, right? And we know that there were people whose, entire family, they would be more than glad to, shuffle off their mortal coil, to quote from Hamlet, right? Precisely because of the fact that they were Jewish, right? Even if they had converted, like, themselves, that didn't matter, right? So we know that it didn't matter how pious you were, right? I barely got into, I've seen the argument about the Inquisition. Yeah, it's like, again, as someone who speaks about that, someone who writes about that, right? That's part of my research. When it comes to sort of like discussing an intersection between, Jewish history and, Latin American history, including, of course, the country that the countries that colonized Latin America, most of them anyway. You, in essence, have to include things like the Inquisition. Like, why did they feel the need to start an Inquisition in Mexico or in Peru? Well, that tells us that there were Jewish people there. So, like, when we watched that one guy that essentially said, oh, there were no Jewish people in Mexico until blah, blah, blah. It's like, then why did they have the Inquisition in the first place? Right? The whole point, like, they had no jurisdiction over the indigenous people. They had no jurisdiction. They were only given the power to go against criollos and peninsulares. So they could only go against those that were European. So it doesn't make any sense to say somehow the Inquisition just didn't do. We know it did its job. We know 1649 was the height of the Inquisition, when the highest amount of people were, to translate it directly, were relaxed, right, or were otherwise, had also had their mortal coil, shuffled off, but
I mean, can you get more definite than that? Documents that have survived until today refer to the pyramids as tombs of the pharaohs. I'm not just talking about Herodotus. For example, in the Harper Song of Intef, probably from around the First Intermediate Period, early to mid-2nd millennium BCE, a verse mentions the gods, meaning kings, who existed before, who rest in their pyramids, and the blessed nobles likewise buried in their pyramids. Yeah, the Abbott Papyrus of the 20th Dynasty, from around...
Also, you can see, like, it's, like, again, most people, when they think of the Egyptian language, right, they think it was always written in hieroglyphs, but you can see here what is often called, the demotic form, relaxed, yeah. Well, it's interesting because they actually did use the phrase, they've been relajados, right? which if I were to translate that directly would come off as the term relaxed. So yeah, I know it's one of those like weird euphemisms that they would use. But in the same way, like for example, there was a belief, again, many historians thought that Judaizing, right, was a separate, was something different from the accusation of being Jewish. But there are many historians that have since shown that those two things were seen as the exact same crime. Right? Being Jewish was just called Judaizing. Because the idea was, again, because they saw it as something inherent in you, then you interacting with other people, right, and possibly, having them, as it were, as they would have said back in the day, in the days of the Inquisition, right, teaching them the ways of the laws of Moses, right, or, leading them into the bosom of Abraham, as they might also say, was something that was seen that you would do inherently, right? Like, oh, of course they're going to do that, right? So again, that's how we learned that the reason why not everybody that is necessarily being called out as being Jewish, right, is actually it actually ended up making it so that more people than we knew at the time, right, were actually Jewish, because they thought that Judaizing was a different crime under the Inquisition, right, than being Jewish, and it wasn't. It was just a sort of a change, right, because it's an active thing, right, like you're actively doing something, right. And then again, that was more consistent with this racializing view, right, that Jewish people represent, right, or signify, XYZ thing, right? So, but yes, as you can see here in this wonderful papyrus, the writing here, which is again the not hieroglyphs, but it's essentially, what became later on the Demotic script. And Demotic just means the people, right? It's the same thing like demonym. Like a demonym is it literally means the people name, right? So the name of a people. Like Mexican is a demonym, right? English, right? The English demonym. The Egyptians demonym, right? So demotic just means the language of the people, right?
1100 BCE or so, documents robberies of many of the kings and queens' tombs, many of which are clearly stated to be pyramids. Number 2, funerary text inscriptions, the pyramid texts as they're often called, were discovered in the remains of pyramids from the late 5th and 6th dynasties.
And again, this goes back to this idea that we don't, unless you find me something that and again, the pyramid text, as David's mentioning, right, are very important. But another thing to keep in mind is the fact that, when the person that's reading it's a power plant video, right, says, oh well, they have art on the walls. But again, it's interesting because it does actually bring a question to mind, which is is it art to them because they cannot understand it, right? Like, do we think that hieroglyphs, right, are as art because for us they don't, as it were, signify anything, right? Like, we don't have any way to interact with them, right? So therefore we see them as though they were something beyond, right, a writing system, right, beyond what they are meant to represent, right? And instead you have them as art. Because if so, right, and this is very common, right, then it becomes slightly more understandable, at least to me, why people might say that, oh, they have ornate art all over the walls. Well, they might have ornate art from our perspective because we might not understand it. But usually that art are literally funerary rites and stuff, talking about the afterlife, etc., about the and in reference to the person who is being buried there, who is in the sarcophagus in that chamber. So again, like, this is where someone like Mr. Beast having free reign with all of his bros, like, I don't know, like, like, what if, I just think, like, what dumb stuff are they gonna do in there? Like, honestly, like, because, like, otherwise, right, if the whole point is to get people to view it, right, to get lots of attention, what can you do while inside ancient pyramids, right, that can grab a lot of attention? I wonder how much it cost for Mr. Beast to rent a pyramid. I mean, it must have been a pretty penny. I'll put it like that. I mean, it definitely is worth. I mean, it's definitely millions of dollars. I would presume. I mean, I'm just surprised that they were willing to give him unlimited access. At least from everything that I know. Again, it was like Ali and Discord particularly went, into it. So he should be banned. Like, I think, to me, the people should decide if they want to have, like, I think, to me, in my opinion, they should be completely protected from use from anybody, even Hollywood. Like, enough. And also, welcome in Good for Gabby. Because, like, look, you really see that there's damage here over the years. Like, thankfully, so much of it has been preserved as in way of pictures, but, like, what if they're like tempted to take one of these or something? I don't know. I don't know what they're gonna do. That doesn't sound like something Egypt wouldn't usually go for. I mean, again, it was reported on Dextero, and when we looked up the videos, right?
Mr. Beast has a disgusting amount of money, because tell me why I just found out that it was reported that he rented out the 3 pyramids of Giza to do a YouTube video. If you want to know how rich I want to be, it's this rich. What we know so far is that Mr. Beast rented the 3 Egyptian pyramids for 100 hours with private access. Now, people have a lot of questions like, what is this YouTube video going to be about? And how did he rent 3 pyramids in Egypt? To answer the most pressing question of how he got the pyramids, essentially he's just working with the Egyptian government to rent them and get this access. I wouldn't be shocked if it also cost him a large sum of money to rent out the 3 pyramids, but he's worth around $500 million, and the video will make a ton more than it probably costs. And it's also content to promote the pyramids of Giza, so I wouldn't be surprised if he worked out something with the Egyptian government. As for the video, Mr. Beast revealed that him and some of his friends will sleep in the pyramids and have the entire area to themselves. They'll also have their own tour guide who will provide them expert knowledge on the pyramids and show them rooms that no one has seen publicly inside the pyramids. Mr. Beast also said that he is so excited to explore all the secret corridors that are deep below and that he has no idea what to expect. On top of that, his friends will be bringing a ton of gadgets to go ghost hunting, it seems. There's no expected date for—
Oh gosh, not ghost hunting. Oh gosh, now it's even worse. When is he renting it? I don't know. Soon, apparently. Soon. Because he said this on a podcast, right? Like, that's why we know that it's confirmed, because, again, it was on a podcast that he said it. Like, he didn't just, like, it's not just, like, oh, speculation or whatever. He actually brought it up that, yes, I was able to get the Egyptian government to let me rent out the 3 pyramids of Giza for 100 hours. And we're going to take our sleeping bags and our little, Pokemon jammies. And, yeah, and go ghost hunting. Which, I just have to say, like, going back to what Jelly posted, the Curse of Ra, like, I don't know, but, if there are any, like, I don't know how, like, I feel like at some point, they're gonna try to, like, hope they get haunted by ancient Egyptians. I don't believe in curses, but if the ancestors come through, I might have to reevaluate. You know, I mean, he's worth. I mean, first of all, I did not know that he was worth $500 million. I knew he had a lot of money. I didn't realize it was $500 million. Right, and he's gonna make tons of money on this video if it does end up, you know, going through, because it's just, of course, you know. Meanwhile, I need, you know, emergency funds myself, so, you know, but I'm not gonna go ghost hunting with Mr. Beast to do that. But like ghost hunting, like, I don't know why, but I almost feel like that somehow is like insulting, like on a very particular level, right? Like, oh, of course the pyramids are haunted because they're the pyramids, right? Yeah. But yes, if you'd like to help me in some way, as you can read in the pinned comment, I am not worth $500 million. And instead, I actually need some emergency funds right now. And so if you are able to give, of course, make sure you can take care of yourself first. You can always donate via the following links that are in the pinned comments, either through Throne, tipping me on Twitch, or through Twitch, Cash App, and Venmo. Okay. I do wish we could send someone dressed up as the mummy. Oh my gosh. That'll be hilarious. Like, ooh, like set it up like one of those like those Halloween haunted houses, right? Like somehow work out, you know. That would be funny.
And they contain spells, encouragement, and instructions for the kings on their journey into the afterlife.
I said this a long time ago, like earlier in the stream, but yes, that's why we know that they're tombs, because the hieroglyphs, like all of the stuff says in this tomb. Like, it's all funerary stuff. It's all just funerary stuff. Like, I don't know. I'm starting to think that like this symbol right here with the feather and the two suns is supposed to mean like funeral or tomb or something.
The kings are even named in the texts.
Yes, yeah, I said this earlier. Yes, again, the pharaohs are named in the text itself. Like, it refers to, oh mighty, you know, Amenhotep III, right? You know, great pharaoh of, you know, of Upper and Lower Egypt, right? Conqueror of, you know, blah 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 blah. You know, the typical stuff, right? You know, the typical way of, you know, the typical stuff that they put on tombs, you know. I mean, even to this day, right? People want to put some, like, you know, grandiose, you know, thing. And it's just like, okay.
These texts about the afterlife would be placed in tombs makes sense. In fact, in later times, these texts were written on papyrus. First as...
I have always thought that the Demotic script, like the way in which Egyptian was written, like, is very beautiful. Like, I love calligraphy, and like when I journal, actually, I often will include, like, I like to have like notepads or journals, right, that are actually without lines, right, without anything, or if they do, sometimes I'll get it with dots, but maybe. But I like to have it that way, so that way I can, like, draw things, but sort of like, and then sort of write around them. But I love, like, the usage of different styles of lettering. Like, I love even the usage of different colors of ink, and, you know, stuff like that. That to me is just so fascinating. But again, like, this is why we know what we know about Egypt, because the Egyptians themselves wrote about it. And we have so many texts. Again, this was one, like, I don't understand why so many people kind of say, well, we can ignore all of this because, you know, it doesn't fit what I believe, essentially. It's the same thing like ignoring Palestinian historians or Palestinian, you know, elders, right? Like people that, you know, and refugees, etc. It's like, oh no, I'm only gonna believe, you know, whatever Benjamin Netanyahu says, because obviously he knows, right? No, don't do
coffin
that.
texts, and finally the Book of the Dead, and placed with deceased Egyptians. We have found them in tombs. Number 3. The pyramids are located within necropolises. A necropolis, city of the dead, is a huge cemetery. In other words, the
By the way, I know this is like a very minor point, but if something original, I mean, again, like this often happens with the word for like the plural of syllabus, right? The Egyptian Royal Air Force. Oh yeah, this map is a little bit old. Oh gosh, geez, when was it that Egypt overthrew its monarchy? Gosh, that's a while ago. Oh gosh, like just thinking about the Egyptian Royal Air Force is just like is when something is derived from Greek, right? Typically you add es to it. Not like an I or whatever. Because this, again, not that I really care, but I've always found it fascinating, right? Because I've always heard people say, like, well, I say syllabuses because, of course, syllable, right, and syllabus, right, are in Greek. So, like, but at one point, I guess this was after I moved back to the U.S. from Mexico. I noticed that a lot of people, like, it just became very apparent, like it just started to really, like, become very overt, like, of a thing to me, like, kind of, not, it wasn't grating, but it was just like, I wonder when Britain will get rid of their monarchy. Hopefully, you know, may democracy may it happen as soon as the people will it, I might say. But so syllabuses, right? But another one of those things is like when you have like octopus, you know, people like to say octopi, but it's technically octopuses. Or the other way, if you want to be really, but again, I've never really cared. It's just syllabi has always, for some reason, stood out to me as like, I don't know why, it just sounds so wrong to me. Like it just has always been that way. But particularly when I came back from, or like when I moved to the U.S. after living in Mexico for a long period of time, like it just was like, stop saying it. Just stop saying that word. Because like for octopus, you can also say octopodes, but nobody really cares about that stuff. Octa people, yeah. I think there'd be a diverse response. A lot of people love their monarch. I'm from a place where people love them and respect them and justify them. So maybe within the next 100 years, Octa people, yeah, exactly. Like, I don't think, like, I'm more trying to say that, like, I find it interesting, like, the fact that in English, right, we can actually, like, aggregate different suffixes, right, for the plurals of things. But yet there are people that are like, oh, but you can't use a plural pronoun for a singular pronoun when actually it was used as a singular, Octopodus, yes. Well, not like Podes, as in like podiatrist, right? Because it means 8 feet or 8 legs. Or I never knew people said syllabi until now. Yeah, like I don't know what it is. Like again, like in Mexico, like if they do refer to a document in that way, they would add os to it, right? Essentially the equivalent of es, right? So I was so used to hearing it like that, and then I came back, and again it was to the West Coast, and I just kept hearing syllabi, and I'm just like, what? You know, like, what are you talking about? You know, but again, it's not a major thing. It's just a thing I noticed, right? That I've always found very interesting. But yeah, octopodes. But yeah, as for like the monarchy, I say syllabi. I don't like double S's. No, yeah, like I totally understand. Like it's totally a personal preference thing. It was just like time period of like when I came back and because it's contextual, I guess, of what was just said, right? With sarcophagi and all of that stuff. But I like octopeople, yeah. But anyway.
Pyramid did not exist as an isolated structure. It represented only one element, the most important, of a grand complex, which included a satellite pyramid, other small pyramids for queens, a mortuary temple, a valley temple, and a causeway between them, and also offering shrines and mastaba tombs for other family members. And
yeah, which again, like, it's like, this goes to show, right? If octopus, if is president, it might be an octopodus. Yes, definitely. We will have an octopodus within our time. But like, again, there's just so much evidence that, I mean, again, the Egyptians say what it is, right? Like, and again, why would the Egyptians need a Tesla power plant? Like, that's what also doesn't make sense, right? Like, why? Like, that also hasn't been answered, right? No, it's funny. I've been seeing some people refer to animals as people lately to give them dignity. Yes, that actually is something that it's actually very interesting, because I was recently reading this sort of a legal document that's actually sort of talking about how how the concept of human rights is too exclusive, right? One, because it imposes a very particular, Western-centric view of what rights are, right, on other people, right? But also because it's very limiting particularly in that it doesn't like the idea that that animals should have rights is somehow seen as like, oh, that you can't do that, right? Because how would they exercise their rights? But there are people, like there are human people, there are people that also for a long period of their life cannot exercise certain rights, so to speak, at least in the legal sense, right? Like if they want to make that argument, right? But instead they were saying that if we are going to essentially the argument is, if Mexico is going to agree to protecting all of these spaces for wildlife, then it shouldn't word it as though, oh, it's there for the people, blah 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 blah. It should also say the rights of the people and all other living, all other animals, right? Like they also have the right to be there, right? And it's a right that has to be, enumerated, so to speak, and elucidated, right? Because of the fact that, again, there are people that that say, well, because they can't exercise their rights, quote unquote, therefore they can't hold the right to that. But again, it's a question of why is it that we allow like corporate entities to have personhood, right? But we don't have a very basic expansion of rights vis-a-vis, right? The animals in the parts of the country, globally speaking, right, or even nationally speaking, right, that have every right to be there as well, right? It's not like national parks are not just there for the human beings, right? Like essentially that's the thrust of the argument, right? Like limiting national parks to just how humans, right, relate to them, right, denies the rights of everything else that's in there, right? And I find it a very fascinating conjecture, right, in this legal study that I was reading, because they're saying, like, if we're going to talk about environmental law, right, it's always in response to just human beings, right? But there's no protection afforded to other beings, right? In fact, we don't even recognize them, right? Yeah. So anyway, before I go off on that tangent again.
Nobles. King Menkari of the 5th dynasty ordered a tomb to be built for his courtier, Debehen, and placed near Menkari's own pyramid at Giza. This suggests that Giza was a place for the dead to be interred. A typical pyramid complex, in turn, was surrounded by a wall, and around that was the larger necropolis. Thus, its location is another indication that the pyramid was intended as...
Oh, wow. So, see... Yeah, it's an interesting legal argument. Like, I'm not going to say that, oh, you know, it's completely, you know, but the point I think that they're trying to argue is that we cannot deny like other beings, right, like their right to have a place to live, or a place to, you know, or their right to access to food, or their right of access to blah blah blah, right? That instead, right, we should recognize the importance of other beings, right, within our well, again, it's part of a larger argument, but yes, I do think it's interesting though, that right here, Mastabat el Faraon, we have that, the tomb caverns. I mean, like, even this map from what looks to be the 19th century, just looking at it, particularly the way how it uses it. There even used to be a convent here. Katz's burying ground. I wonder if Katz's burying ground, because that seems like, anyway, I don't know. Haram el Maharbash. Hello, MIDI doctors. Welcome in. Welcome in. Pools of water. Saqqara. Yeah, I don't. Okay.
The tomb. Number 4. Mortuary temples were placed next to the pyramids. Priests officiated at these temples, where offerings were given to a dead king, next to the pyramid.
Also, thank you so much, MIDI Doctor, for your donation earlier. I really appreciate that. I think I am so I'm very humbled by the fact that you and others have been so kind to me to have given me any help right now that I need it. And so I just wanted to express my thanks to all of you. Yes, we have these mortuary temples, which, again, yeah, it's just one of those weird times of the year where, like, people, like, this is also the time when tons of people, like, if they have, like, credit cards, if they even qualify for credit cards, I guess, usually tend to, rack up a lot of debt. Then they spend the rest of the year paying off. Thank you so much, Omega Star. That's so kind. One thing I've always found quite interesting is people know of the Code of Hammurabi, right? I think calling animals people closes more the gap between humans and the rest of the animal kingdom, because we too are animals just as much as they are. I think animals are considered less than humans, especially in law. Yeah. I mean, that's the reason why I think that them using the term in Spanish, it's ente, right? A living ente. And ente is like, it's like the word entity, right? But again, but I would translate it to the word being, right? So the way how it's written is saying that living beings, right, should be afforded, right, particular like rights vis-a-vis this space, right? That so then that way, like, no government can ever, like, because if it's very anthropocentric, right, then you can have someone say, like you do have in the United States, right, where you had protected waters or even national parks, right, that now, like under the Biden administration, if you had opening up to was it fracking, I think, something like that. And essentially this would put into law something that says you can't do that, because it isn't just about what human beings want, it's what all living beings want, right? And so it would put the onus on trying to minimize any damage to habitats and all of these things, again, at least ostensibly speaking, of course. But I don't even think. No, yeah, I completely agree, McGoggles, and that's another thing as well. Like, there is a lawyer that I know, and like we actually actually there was a time when he spoke about this, saying that the sort of incongruence, right, of the law in Mexico, which in our Constitution it says, like, all treaties and such that we sign, right, become, as if they were part of the Constitution, so to speak. So, or rather, that is what it says, actually, in Article 1 of the Constitution. However, there are things that it says in the and again, I obviously know this is a bit of a different point necessarily from the one you're making, but it kind of jives along the same way, is that it therefore means that you have rights that are enumerated in, for example, the UN Charter of Human Rights, right, the UN, etc., and that actually are not enshrined in the Constitution, right, or are actively disallowed by the Constitution, or by other laws, right? And so that was one of the things, like he was saying that, like, in Mexico, the law, like, or rather, according to human rights, the human rights document that he was discussing, the UN Charter of Human Rights, or the UN Declaration of Human Rights, sorry, it says, right, like, people have the right to, to their beliefs, etc., 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 right, when it comes to, like, political views, when it comes to all of this stuff. But in Mexican law, there is a thing that says, right, you cannot, attack is the word they use, atacar, right? A democratic republic form of government, right? Well, what does that mean? One, like, how does one attack it? Because typically they, does that mean that speaking out, saying its problems is, quote unquote, attacking a democratic republic, a state form? Or is it that, wanting, and so that was one of the things that he brought up that kind of stood out, right, at least from what I can remember, is that it says people should be able to have a freedom of conscience when it comes to anything, right, so to speak, at least in the sense of, but then we have laws on the books that preclude that, right, that don't actually allow you to to uphold those human rights that are supposedly given. And again, another thing is that, yeah, those human rights are distributed, so to speak, unequally, right? And we know this because we can even see the hypocrisy of institutions that are said to uphold human rights, like, right, the way how the United States speaks about, or rather, how the United States did a complete volte-face, right, when it came to the ICC, right, when the ICC had its arrest warrant sent out for Putin, right, and that woman, I don't remember her name right now, the Biden administration was happy about it, saying, "Oh, we're so glad that the ICC, blah blah blah," right? But when the ICC, put out its arrest warrants for Yoav Gallant and Benjamin Netanyahu, suddenly they're like, "How dare the court? The court has no jurisdiction." And you even find this in some European countries, where, like in France, where they at first said they would uphold the ICC ruling, but then they're like, well, we couldn't because diplomatic immunity and blah blah blah. And it's like, I think a genocidaire, I think we can forego, the idea of diplomatic immunity. Like, I think that, like, they're literally holding up special rights that are given to diplomats, right? And that the heads of state, right? As if he weren't being accused of some of the most grievous crimes, right? That are understood under international law. And yet, so they had that where they were like saying, "Oh, we're not going to enforce it." The United States was saying, "We don't believe it. It's the ICC's jurisdiction." Blah blah blah, right? And then right now that they put out an arrest warrant for Assad and other people, right? They're like, "Oh, the ICC, how wonderful that it's finally going to go after this whole, So again, proving that, even when it comes to upholding, right, this veneer of supposed, legal objectivity, etc., it's not the case, right? Instead, we have it where the United States in particular will accept whenever its geopolitical enemies are the ones being requested to join, requested to be indicted by ICC, by the International Criminal Court. But as soon as it comes to one of their, vassal states, right, suddenly it's seen as this horrific, how dare you do this, right? And let alone the fact that the United States, I'll put it to you like this, McGoggles. When you look on Amnesty International, right, usually they have everything separated by continent, right? Like Africa, blah, 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 right? Or if not huge, large geographic regions, right? Like the Middle East or whatever, right? The United States is the only country that has its own section for all of its human rights violations. Like, if you click on it, it shows you all of the vast amounts of different human rights violations that the United States commits on its own. Because if you click the Americas, it has all of the countries, but not the United States, because it literally gets its own category. Because of, and again, you can go see this and if you go to Amnesty International, right? It's pretty standard actually. Where typically the United States will literally get its own category, and instead what you get is a breakdown of the different types of human rights violations that are ongoing. In fact, right now, I'm reading through one of Human Rights Watch's most recent reports about what is happening in with the family separations and all of that, right? Again, with the mass deportations that are being promised, to start on day one, right, in mind, and it's so bleak. It's quite sad the fact that, you see, I mean, just to read some of the stuff that happens to the children, to like I would just give you one quick example. There are, and again, this is from, you can go read it yourself. It's available for the public as always, right? Is that you have the ICE officers, right, and the Border Patrol officers, right, essentially, like, well, I'll put it to you like this, in at least one way. In Spanish, what they call those centers, right, the quote-unquote detention centers, right, are perreras, right, literally like dog pounds, because that's where they put the kids in. Like, if you've ever been to like the pet shelter, right, like if to adopt a dog that's like a county one or a city one, right, and they put them in it's a rather large space, right, but just surrounded with, that's what they are putting children in, multiple children. And they will even lie about the fact that, and again, this is all in the report, they will even lie to the parents saying they don't know where the kids are, and will also use that lie so that even though they will be readmitted into the same system, right? Because what ends up happening is Border Patrol and ICE will often put the parents and put them into, send them to the U.S. Marshal Service, right? Which means they're no longer in their jurisdiction, right? They're no longer, as it were, under their custody and control, the 3C's: care, custody, control, right? At least when it comes to children, right? They use that fact. The fact that they could literally be, like, it could be the next day that the parents would be reunited with the kids. They use that fact that they are technically speaking, even though they could be, again, mere meters away, to say that they are like unaccompanied, and that the parents are absent, right? And there have been cases where people didn't know where their children were for so long, to the point where they find out that they were deported. The children were deported. Like, imagine a child being dropped off. That is how bad this is. Like, this is the reason why, like, the discomfort, the anxiety, all of the things that I've, like, mentioned before, right, are things that, again, I don't feel that I am wrongly feeling, right, anxiety about, the promises of mass deportation, because we know the history of the United States includes mass deportations, let alone what's happening, in those detentions. I also know that children have had to represent themselves in court cases too. Another thing that they will also do is they will tell the parents that if they will, as it were, on their own accord, and this is the same thing that happened in the 30s, same thing happened in the 50s, right? Leave the country, that then they will be reunited with their children, right? So if they deny themselves the chance to even be seen by, to even claim asylum, right? They will lie to them and say, if you give this up, if you leave, then we'll let you have then you'll actually see your kid again. And that's the only way to get them back, right? Again, it's all right there in the Human Rights Watch report. It's the top report when you enter the website, just published. So yeah, human rights are not spread equally. We have documented cases of, even Human Rights Watch own lawyers themselves saw this. I mean, this is how much impunity they feel, where they were verbally abusing children, right? Telling them all sorts of stuff, right? Children, right? They could be, I mean, like, with the exception of them being, need to be with the mother, right? Or with the gestating person, right? Which also, don't even get me started on when it comes to, the very transphobic nature of a lot of what's, because that's also a thing, and unfortunately people don't put quite enough attention on it. But do they get their children again, or is that not often the case? A lot of the time, yes. But again, essentially it means that they will not be allowed into the country again. Because remember, if you, like, for whatever reason, it's actually against international law to do this. And they have made it a crime, right? It's technically a misdemeanor. Yeah, it's really bad. Again, this is why, again, like, as a historian and everything, like, when I bring up these things, I know they're not the cheeriest of things, but it's what's happening, right? And one of the things to keep in mind is the fact that, the Border Patrol, the Texas Rangers, the U.S. Marshal Service, all of them, they have always worked together to, harm people, right? And any idea that they ever did any good is completely just a lie, historically. And presently, I would say. Because again, we have, and these examples are not like, oh, last year. We're talking about like weeks ago. This was occurring, right? This isn't stuff that, like, oh, it happened, ages ago and blah blah blah. No, this is happening right now. Right now. And again, this is all part of a broader, right, systematic attack on human rights, right, particularly when it pertains to people who are marginalized, and those who, due to the United States' imperialist policies, feel compelled to come to the United States, right? Because, right, so, like, in the same way that, like, Trump saying he wants to annex Mexico or invade Mexico doesn't even make sense, because then everything, what benefit? It just feeds the racism, really. It just satisfies the racism. Because in the 30s, again, you had the AFL, you had all of these different, I mean, again, the AFL, which is a union, but is now the AFL-CIO, right? They were very racist openly, and they helped in the process to deport, again, of around 2 million, a little bit, people. And that's actually where the rhetoric around they took our jobs, right, comes from. That's literally where it comes from. The decade of betrayal, as it's often called. In fact, the book, one of the best books on the subject, is that, right? Yeah, it feeds the belief that the scapegoat is the real issue, right? Because it doesn't matter at the end of the day whether or not, right? Like, oh, even if they do expel us, right? Again, for the, who knows how many times. It won't actually solve any of the problems that supposedly we cause, right? And again, this happened during, like, in the 30s. Remember, think about this, right? This happened during the Hoover administration, but most of it happened during the FDR administration, because he was inaugurated as president in 1933. So from 33 to 40, right, where you have the mass deportation of Mexicans, it was under FDR, right? So like the whole New Deal and blah, 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 like the reason why a lot of that, like we understand, like people understand that it was, or people need to understand that it was a racially, right, like it was done to further segregate people. Franklin Delano Roosevelt, the one who, was the president during like World War II, the one that won like 4 terms in the presidency, and then Congress voted to never allow that to happen again. There really is no benefit, so to speak, right? Like we know, like, but see, the thing is that appealing to this idea that, oh, it's going to cost a lot of money or it's going to harm the economy, that is not the right, I mean, that is not how human beings should have to justify, right, not being mass expelled, right? Because literally, like even the language of concentration camp, right, that is something that Congressman Hobbs of Alabama in the 30s said we should build concentration camps, right, to detain Mexicans until we can fully expel them out of the country. And this wasn't just LA. This was all 50, well, at that time it would have been 49 states, but all 49 states and Hawaii. There were entire communities that essentially vanished off the face of the earth because of this, right? Even the co-author, right, Dr. Raymond Ramirez of Cal State Los Angeles, who worked with Dr. Valderrama, who was also at Cal State Los Angeles. He testified before the California Congress, right? And he revealed that he never got to meet his own father because his father was forcefully deported one day when he was walking to work. So it's not even a question of, like we shouldn't have to justify being here by saying, oh, we are really good workers, right? We are really good this, like all of that rhetoric has always been very, in my view, actually allows for a lot of the negative stereotypes, right, to arise as well, right? Because of course, we are far more than the people. I mean, it reminds me of when what's her name? Is it Kelly Osbourne, right? Like said to Trump, like, oh, you keep talking about Mexicans and blah 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 blah, but who do you think is going to clean your toilet, right? That is not the way to go. That is not the rhetorical strategy you want to take, right? That is like, we shouldn't have to justify why we should be here because of money, right? Like, oh yes, we can be exploited so much. It's kind of like it's kind of like that meme, right, where he like slaps the car and it's like, I can fit so much spaghetti in this, like you don't want to do that, right? Because again, at some point you're feeding into the same thing, right? Instead, it's that we shouldn't have ever had to justify, because the idea of criminalizing crossing a boundary, right? Crossing an international frontier, it being illegal is actually illegal under international law. But even then, it's a misdemeanor. And it has been said by so many courts before that it is by far the lowest crime possible that you could possibly ever get. But yet it was the using of that misdemeanor, right, that they took our jobs. Yeah, exactly. Because again, if we're saying, oh, look at all the jobs we do, right? Their whole thing is premised on we are doing certain jobs, right? And so therefore, we are blah, 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 right? And so it's not good to reply in kind, right, with the same type of thing, right? So I was at my fifth psychiatrist appointment yesterday, and the medical assistant I was talking to was saying we should tighten the borders and that ruined my therapy session. LOL. That's not the take you should have. Again, like, they're out here traumatizing entire families. Like this has been studied by, clinical psychologists, psychiatrists, etc., that the trauma that they are causing. I mean, again, I could go into so many different cases, but I also know, right, that it would be a lot, right? Because there's one case that comes to mind that, honestly, when I read it in the Human Rights Report, it honestly made me tear up. It honestly made me want to cry, because I was just like, they really do see us as less than nothing, don't they? And I don't know what else to say. It is an innocent child who's done nothing to deserve that treatment, being treated that way literally just because of an invisible line is horrifying. It should be common sense to know. I'll link it in the Discord, so make sure you're in the Discord. Spill drink. There are people who care. I wish those who care were the ones in power. Yeah, it should be common sense to know they're being unbelievably traumatized. But again, a lot of that is that they're not unaware that they're being traumatized, right? That's one of the problems, right? Like, she's tough as nails, but I hate what's coming for her. But there's just a lot of examples where you almost feel helpless, right? Like, again, even myself, it's like, like I had planned on reading it through, and then with other reports as well as other documents that I have, right, start beginning an academic article, right? And but it actually sort of made me take a step back. Actually, I had to stop reading it because, just hearing of all of these, just horrific stories, that were not just like, oh, this is just what they're saying. Like, this was stuff that happened even in front of the lawyers of Human Rights Watch. Right? Like, that's how much impunity they feel. Right? The Border Patrol people. They feel like they have every right to do what they do. Right? And again, Trump again, in a historical sense, right, appealing to what happened in 1954 with Operation Racial Slur, only adds on to that, right? There is a reason why he keeps referencing it, right? One, because, of course, it has a racial slur in the name, right? But also it proves that, legally speaking, there were that it was permissible to do that, right? And it has been seen as permissible, and you really have a populace that, it's a racial slur. That's not its name, but it's a racial, but they use a racial slur that's a racial slur against Mexicans. This was done during the Eisenhower administration in 1954, and that's the one he keeps referencing that he wants to recreate. Yeah, in the Discord, if you want to join in after, especially after I eat dinner and such, just to chat, I can bring it up, something that talks about it. Yeah, it's Operation Racial Slur. Yeah. But in essence, the election was about helping people and screwing them over. Too bad so many people are so hateful. Well, yeah, again, like even with FDR, who, people will say, oh, well, he have a socialist vice president. Well, even with that socialist vice president, still did the mass expulsion of Mexicans, right? I mean, yeah, it is definitely by fear, but also in many ways is also, exacerbated also by privileges that are given out, right? Um, and there's just so much that goes into it that's the reason why, um, like like there's a book actually on my throne, right? That's called The Plaza of Sacrifices, um, and it actually talks about how like this sort of zenith, one might say, or summit. Yeah, well, zenith I think works better. Of like when the dictatorship in Mexico sort of finally decided to show its full force of violence, right, was literally at one of the most peaceful protests ever, right? And that how gender and so many other things played a role in that, like how they wanted to emasculate the those that those that were seen as male, right? And how they wanted to treat, right, those that, how, again, in a binary sense, right? They only saw him in a binary sense. Those that they saw as female, right? And so many other things. And you see what happened in Tlatelolco in 1968, right? Which was a huge protest, but ended up becoming a massacre. Is that the supposed reason why they sent the army on 3 sides of this plaza is because they were trying to, quote unquote, stop the protesters from taking over the Ministry of Foreign Affairs building, which it is technically nearby, but it wasn't where everybody was. It just happened to be nearby. But, again, I haven't had a chance to read the entire book. I've only read a little bit, but again, that's on Throne. I mean, obviously, it's sort of secondary to my more immediate needs, but still, that's one of those books that also sort of informs how I sort of see the immigration wave that happens as a result of this crackdown, right? Poor Latinos for Trump don't understand they'll never be on the team. Well, I mean, again, right? And I understand what you're saying, Omega Star, and you're, like, that's true. And, but, like, it didn't surprise me that the number of people went up. But also, like, because of the growth of particular communities that are more right-wing, are more conservative in general, also amounted in that as well, right? So I think that's, important to keep in mind. But still, yeah, like, I mean, it's like, again, like the people in South Texas that are pro-Trump and their house, like the house was, their house literally had the border fence as, like, their back fence was the border fence, right? And so someone who was trying to seek refuge, right? Oh, no, I totally, yeah, don't worry, Omega Star. You're fine, trust me. Because you're right. The people that think that somehow they're going to get some sort of recompense for this vote, it's like, again, 60% or more, more than 60%, I should say, of the people in both mass expulsions of Mexicans were U.S. citizens or documented, right? So again, we're only going to do the quote-unquote illegal, like, just, that isn't even what are you even talking about? So... Okay, well. Just one quick second. Okay, everyone. Thank you very much for joining me in this stream today. I really appreciate it. Those of you that are on Twitch, if you could please all get in the machine so we could go over to Peacefire now. Make sure to say hello to our friend. And I will see you all very soon. Thank you. Thank you all. I really appreciate it. Bye. Trump is not Rocco's basilisk. Voting for him won't spare you punishment. Yeah, no, it's it's